Chapter 107. Renbochin started a fire and roasted one of the baba's legs. He even used stones to build a circle in the stream and soaked the other leg in it. The smell of blood would be washed away by the stream. This leg would be left here for tomorrow's breakfast. As for the other corpses, they were thrown far away to prevent the smell of blood from attracting other animals. He was now holding on to the idea of going down the mountain the next morning. As for the bay and the like, they could go to hell. After witnessing that battle, the danger level of the wild beasts in this world skyrocketed in his heart. I'm not Ultraman, I can't beat little monsters. At this point in time, the sky had already started to darken. The bonfire by the stream flickered brightly, and he could hear the roars of beasts in the distant forest. Renbochin had a strange feeling in his heart. Unfortunately, it wasn't the feeling of being close to nature or anything like that. It was just eerie, terrifying, and full of danger. He used a knife to make a few cuts on the bay beast's leg. Then, he sprinkled some seasonings on it before turning it over and roasting it. After a while, the fragrance began to spread far away. Wu Fang, who was on a tree not far away, rubbed his belly and took a bite of the berry in his hand. These were the few that he had picked nearby. They were very sour and barely enough to fill his stomach. Smelling the fragrance in the distance, he began to feel unbalanced. Renbochin was obviously so weak, yet nothing happened to him after he wandered around in the forest for an entire afternoon. After killing 2 people, he was still able to strut around and roast meat. Not only was he injured, but he also couldn't tell anyone about it. It was too embarrassing. Moreover, he had to watch the other party eat meat while he ate berries. Thinking up to here, the 5 parties felt dejected. There was really no one to reason with. Although Wu Fang's face was mournful, his hands suddenly grabbed out like lightning. When he returned, there was already a snake that was as thick as 3 fingers. He exerted force from the back and the body of the snake that was originally coiled around his arm fell down. He took out a knife and cut open the snake's head, skinned it, and took out its internal organs. Then, he stuffed the tail into his mouth and bit down, imagining that it was barbecued meat. As the aroma drifted out, Renbochin felt that he was getting hungrier. He stared at the meat on the bonfire, waiting to eat his fill. Today could be said to be a tough day for an ordinary person like him. If possible, he hoped that there would never be a next time. Unfortunately, in the foreseeable future, it would be difficult for him to rest well tonight. After all, even if they were in the trees, there were still many dangers in this forest. The tree could only help him avoid some danger, but it was not a place where he could rest easy. The sound of footsteps could be heard, and a figure emerged from the darkness. Renbochin immediately pointed his gun at the figure and asked, "Who is it?" "Deputy Ren. It's great to see your true self." Ning Kaichin, who was dressed in rags, cheered. His eyes were brimming with tears when he saw Renbochin. "Why is it you again?" Renbochin couldn't help but think. Renbochin didn't know what to say since he was able to encounter them twice in such a huge forest. He had always suspected that Ning Kaichin was pretending to be weak. However, Ning Kaichin had always shown that he was as weak as him. Furthermore, Ning Kaichin's body was covered with bloodstains from fighting in the forest and his clothes were torn into several pieces. From the looks of it, the wild boar was chasing it quite miserably. But at this time, he was still in the forest and did not go down the mountain. "Why didn't you go down the mountain?" Renbochin asked. Generally speaking, these young masters would only come here to experience the scenery and would go down the mountain to rest at night. Just now, I saw a beautiful scenery. Due to my greed, I looked at it for a while longer and couldn't find the way down the mountain, Ning Kaichin said shyly. "Deputy Ren, if you are interested, I can bring you there tomorrow morning. Watching the sunrise and sunset there is like being in a fairyland." Renbochin wasn't interested in watching the sunrise and sunset. He was only interested in going down the mountain and sleeping peacefully in his bed. However, it's great to see Deputy Ren. Ning Kaichin cheered again. I initially thought I would have to starve tonight. In the end, I saw the fire from afar and thought that it was fate that we met in the wilderness. I came over to ask for some food. I didn't expect to see Deputy Ren here. Renbochin continued to roast and knead the wild boar. He didn't dislike Ning Kaichin, who loved to brag. After all, Ning Kaichin was a person who was easy to get along with. In Lan City, Renbochin didn't let him down and didn't feel that Ning Kaichin would harm him. Furthermore, he felt that it was good to have a companion on such a night. After all, he was a social animal. Even if he didn't like to gather with others, it didn't mean that he was willing to stay alone in the wilderness. Even if he listened to Ning Kaichin brag, he would feel better for the night. As for whether Ning Kaichin was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, Renbochin didn't really care. Looking at the babe leg that was about to be cooked, Renbochin felt that it would be difficult for the two of them to eat it. It didn't matter even if they weren't full. It was better not to roast the leg that was soaking in the stream, as it was too troublesome. Now that the sky was so dark, it was better to finish eating and return to the tree. The two of them impatiently waited for a long time before Renbochin brought the babe leg back. The aroma that assailed their nostrils made them want to eat it immediately. After waiting for the babe leg to cool down a little, the two of them started to tear off the meat from the leg and stuffed it into their mouths. It tasted like dog meat and was very fragrant. After a while, the entire leg was in their stomachs. Both of them laid on the pebbles beside the stream and sighed comfortably. Deputy Ren, your cooking skills are really good. Ning Kaichin lay at the side and exclaimed in admiration. Renbochin smiled and didn't reply. It wasn't that his cooking skills were good, it was that the seasoning was good. Furthermore, the meat of the animals in this world was better than that on Earth. The giant goat that they ate previously was one of them. After lying down for a few minutes, the roars of beasts could still be heard from afar. Some were near while some were far away. The nearest one was about 300 to 400 meters away. Renbochin sat up from the ground and said, I'm going to go up the tree to rest. After finishing his sentence, he added some branches to the fire. He hoped that the fire would burn for a longer time. He turned around and walked to the bottom of the tree. Renbochin looked up and immediately cursed, damn you. He saw that there were a few more snakes on the tree. Renbochin couldn't help but wonder if he had the physique to attract snakes. Wherever he stayed, the snakes would crawl. Furthermore, they would specifically wait for him to leave before occupying his place. What's wrong with my uncle? Ning Kaichin asked with a perplexed look. Your uncle is a good person. Renbochin replied without turning his head. He turned his head to look for other trees that he could rest on. Just now, he saw a few trees. Ignoring Ning Kaichin, who was behind him, Renbochin walked back and found another tree that was suitable for him to hide in. In the end, when he reached the bottom of the tree, he heard a hissing sound. Renbochin was extremely depressed. Why was he so unlucky? Why did the snakes choose whichever tree he liked? I'm not Su Xian. Why do you have to do this? Chapter 108. On the way back, Renbochin noticed that there were snakes on the few trees that he had noticed earlier. This left Renbochin speechless. At this moment, the light from the fire couldn't reach his position. Renbochin looked at the surrounding pitch-black forest. He didn't know whether it was a bird or a beast that was making strange sounds. After standing there for a while, he turned around, walked back to the bonfire, and sat down. Looking at Ning Kaichin, who was beside him, Renbochin thought of the big rock from before. However, Ning Kaichin's shoulders were only about 1.5 meters tall. Renbochin reckoned that he wouldn't be able to climb up by stepping on him. After thinking about it, Renbochin gave up and decided to stay here. The sky had already turned dark, and it was estimated to be around 9 o'clock. It wasn't suitable to wander around in the forest now. Howl! A wolf howled from afar, and the forest became even more eerie at night. Both of them sat by the bonfire in a daze. Feeling bored, Renbochin chatted with Ning Kaichin. Most of the time, Ning Kaichin was talking while Renbochin was listening. Ning Kaichin developed his long-winded style and spoke eloquently and eloquently. Do you think there are ghosts in this world? Renbochin suddenly asked curiously. Previously, Ning Kaichin talked about what he had seen and heard along the way. There were many supernatural things, but Renbochin didn't know whether they were true or not. In any case, he felt like he was talking nonsense. Now, both of them were in the wilderness, guarding a bonfire, listening to the howls of wild beasts in the distance. Suddenly, Renbochin thought of this question. Ning Kaichin put on a serious face and replied, "Of course there are. When I came here, I passed by a village. There was no one there, and all the doors and windows were tightly shut. I knocked from the end of the village to the end, but no one opened the door. When the sky turned dark, all the villagers opened the door and came out. The whole village was very lively, and all the adults and children were there. In order to welcome a foreigner like me, they even lit a bonfire in the middle of the village, just like the one we have now, but much bigger. Then, they took out all the food they had at home, and the whole village gathered around the bonfire, singing and dancing. From their clothes, I can tell that their families aren't rich. Their children run around naked, but they still took out all the food they had at home." When Ning Kaichin said this, the bonfire reflected in his eyes seemed to be the scene of that night. His face was filled with nostalgia and a smile. They were really enthusiastic, and the wine they brewed was also very strong. I fell asleep after drinking half a bowl. When he woke up the next day, he found himself lying in the middle of the village. Everything around him had been cleaned up. And the villagers all shut their doors and did not come out. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't find anyone, so I left the village. After walking for half a day, they found another village and asked for water. They also asked about what happened in that village. Guess what? Ning Kaichin turned around and asked Renbochin. Everyone in that village is dead. Renbochin guessed. Combining the information from before and after, this should be the case, right? Ning Kaichin nodded his head vigorously. Yes, you guessed it right. That village had been wiped out by a plague decades ago. The village I went to later was built by the people who escaped from that village. Is this a story? Renbochin didn't believe it. Renbochin had heard this kind of story 1,000 times. I swear to the heavens that I experienced it personally. Ning Kaichin immediately swore. Renbochin looked at him, turned his head away, lowered his head, and used a wooden stick to write and draw on the ground. These were words that he had learned in this world. He drew them for fun when he had nothing to do. He still didn't quite believe Ning Kaichin's words. This was because, in his impression, oaths were the most unreliable thing. Of course, perhaps the people in this world took oaths very seriously, but he didn't feel much about it. Ning Kaichin continued, after that, I specially went to the graveyard next to that village to pay my respects. Renbochin didn't reply, and he didn't say anything either. He just raised his head and looked at the starry sky. At this moment, other than the roars of the beasts in the distance, there was only the crackling sound of the bonfire in front of them. After a while, Ning Kaichin poked his arm. Renbochin looked up and saw that Ning Kaichin's expression was more serious than before. Something is watching us. Where? How do you know? Renbochin was puzzled. He turned his head and looked around. Very soon, he knew how Ning Kaichin knew because he also saw something. More than 10 pairs of green eyes were glowing in the dark forest. Renbochin slowly got up, raised his crossbow, and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" "They are approaching us. We will know soon." Ning Kaichen did the same action as him. However, Renbochin still had a crossbow in his hand. Ning Caichen's hand was empty, so he directly pulled out a burning branch from the bonfire. Renbochin was sweating profusely. Encountering wild beasts in the forest in the middle of the night wasn't just bad. What was worse was that it wasn't just one, but a group of them. It was so dark, and the two of them really didn't dare to run around. It was too dangerous, and a single snake could kill them. Moreover, the two of them might not be able to outrun them. "Are they afraid of fire?" Renbochin muttered to himself. Generally speaking, wild beasts were afraid of fire, and it was safer to stay near the bonfire. Furthermore, the bonfire was still blazing, and it gave him some peace of mind. "They are out." Following Ning Caichen's words, the figures at the front were revealed. The first to come out were a few large huskies. Or rather, wild wolves. However, they really looked like them. It was just that they were too big. Their shoulder height was almost 1 meter, and they were completely gigantic. Furthermore, the eyes of these wild wolves were filled with cruelty. They opened their mouths slightly, revealing their fangs. It seemed like they were going to treat the two of them as their dinner. "Ning Kaichen, if you have any tricks up your sleeves, quickly use them. There are only the two of us now, so don't pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger." Renbochin looked at the wild wolves walking out of the forest one after another. His whole body shivered, and he took out his gun with his other hand. Ning Kaichen asked with a serious face, "Deputy Ren, can't you deal with them? What do you think? Can't you tell that I have never practiced martial arts before?" Renbochin replied unhappily, "I can't even defeat one of them, and now it all depends on you. If you can't do it, both of us will be in the stomach of the wolves today." "I understand." Ning Kaichen nodded his head. Following which, he straightened his body, raised one of his hands, and pointed his 5 fingers toward the sky. He shouted, "Sword, come." An inexplicable yet formidable aura rose from his body. Seeing Ning Caichen's actions, Renbochin was elated. This Ning Kaichen was indeed pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. With him around, it seemed like they would be safe tonight. Feeling elated, Renbochin even had the mood to turn his head to look at Ning Caichen's appearance. He had to admit that Ning Caichen's appearance was pretty good. He had a standard pretty boy face, straightened his body, raised his arm, and shouted, "Sword, come." Excluding his ragged clothes, Renbochin would give him 8 points for his appearance. After he killed this pack of wolves, Renbochin would give him 2 points. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed. Ning Kaichen was still in that pose. Renbochin was speechless. What's going on? Great Xia is too far away from here, and the sword still needs to fly for a while. Chapter 109. Great Xia is too far away from here. The sword still has to fly for a while. Upon hearing this, Renbochin felt as though 10,000 alpacas were galloping wildly in his heart. Can't you defeat these wolves without a sword? Renbochin looked at Ning Kaichen, who was still in that pose, and said in a low voice with a hidden bitterness. As for the sword flying over from Great Xia, he felt that it was a fantasy story. However, it was already a critical juncture. He also felt that Ning Kaichen couldn't possibly be full of himself at this point in time, right? Ning Kaichen was still in the pose of grabbing the sky with one hand. Previously, Renbochin felt that this pose was worth 8 points, but now, he only wanted to give him a slap. Deputy Ren, I have to trouble you to delay for a while. Without the sword, I am no different from an ordinary person, Ning Kaichen turned around and said to Renbochin. Without the sword, he was no different from an ordinary person. Renbochin really didn't know what kind of setting this was. However, He had no other choice now and could only ask, "How long will it take?" "According to the distance, it should be about the time it takes to drink 2 cups of tea," Ning Kaichen replied. "Damn you," Renbochin cursed angrily. This was really a fraud. Renbochin no longer cared about Ning Kaichen's pose. He raised his crossbow and aimed at the opposite side. The wolves were getting closer. However, they weren't in a hurry to attack. The wolves at the back began to disperse and surround them. Renbochin hesitated for a while. He didn't know whether to strike first and show the wolves how powerful they were, or to delay for as long as possible and wait for Ning Kaichen. If he struck first, the other party might be vigilant and perhaps he could even injure a few wolves first. This way, the pressure would be reduced. Otherwise, if the other party surrounded them and attacked at the same time, the two of them would probably be fed to the wolves. If he continued to wait, he would allow the other party to complete the encirclement. How long they could delay for would depend on the deterrent effect of the bonfire. Both methods had their pros and cons. For a moment, Renbochin didn't know what to do. However, he quickly clenched his teeth and forced himself to calm down. This wasn't the time to do nothing when you can't make a decision. At this moment, the nearest wolf was only about 20 meters away from him. He raised his hand, aimed, and immediately shot an arrow. Ow! The wolf at the front howled miserably as the arrow left a bloody wound on its body. Renbochin hurriedly loaded the arrow and took aim again. While he was doing this, the wolves were a few meters closer. Another arrow shot out, this time hitting the chest of the other wolf, causing it to let out a blood-curdling screech. Looking at the length of the exposed arrow shaft, it was only 4 or 5 centimeters deep. It seemed that the wolf didn't lose its ability to fight. After the 2 arrows were shot, the wolves became even more irritable. Seeing that the other wolves were surrounding him from both sides, Renbochin aimed his pistol at them. He threw the crossbow on the ground with his other hand and took out a spare magazine from his bag. Paw! 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 Under the night sky, the forest began to emit crisp and short gunshots. 2 wolves burst out with blood. At this moment, all the wolves began to be vigilant. They growled in a low voice and retreated a little, expanding the circle. Renbochin was overjoyed. It seemed like he had done the right thing. As long as they didn't start cultivating immediately, it would be fine if they dragged it out for a while longer. The time taken to brew 2 cups of tea was about 10 minutes, and more than 2 minutes had already passed. She hoped that Ning Kaichen would not stand her up again. Otherwise, she would definitely kill him before she died. Renbochin vigilantly looked at the surrounding wolves. As long as one of them came closer, he would immediately shoot at it, forcing the pack of wolves to retreat. However, even though a few wolves had suffered gunshot wounds, only one wolf fell to the ground and moaned weakly. That wolf had coincidentally been shot in the throat. As for the other wolves, even though their movements were affected after being shot, it didn't seem to be fatal. A few more minutes passed, and the sweat on Renbochin's forehead didn't stop. These wolves were constantly probing him, and after a few minutes, they started to become smarter. Once he raised his hand, they would jump to one side. How much longer? Renbochin couldn't help but ask. 10 more minutes. Deputy Ren, hang in there. It's all up to you now. Not only your life, but my life is also in your hands. Ning Kaichen encouraged him. I don't need you to feed me chicken soup, Renbochin couldn't help but whisper. At the same time, he raised his hand and fired another shot. Their patient seems to be getting worse, Renbochin said as he changed the magazine. He had already sensed that the pack of wolves was getting impatient. The surrounding wolves lowered their bodies and growled, giving Renbochin the feeling that they were about to attack. Renbochin clenched his teeth and took out a grenade. Even though he didn't want to use it, he was afraid that others would link him to Lian Baoqing's death. However, in the current situation, he had already used up a magazine, and other than one wolf, the rest of the wolves were injured but not dead. There were a total of 13 wolves surrounding him. If they were to enter the palace together, he was afraid that he would be torn to pieces in an instant. Under such circumstances, he could only rely on the grenade. Not only could it kill a few wolves, but it could also scare them. As for the rest, he would think about it later. If he couldn't get past them now, there would be no future. Renbochin, with a pistol and a grenade in his hand, was in a stalemate with those wolves for another minute. Every minute was like torture for him. There were a few times when he felt that those wolves would pounce on him and tear him to pieces. Seems like I really can't wait any longer. Renbochin thought to himself. There were still 4 minutes left, and these wolves might pounce on him in the next second. It would be too late even if he wanted to throw the grenade. I'll risk it. It doesn't matter if I'm exposed, I have to get past this obstacle first. Renbochin thought to himself and finally made up his mind. He placed the grenade at the side of his mouth, bit on the ring, and exerted force. Following which, he threw the grenade to his left side more than 10 meters away. It landed near 3 wolves. Those wolves only paid attention to it at first, but soon after, they ignored it. Ning Kaichen was on his left side. If those wolves pounced on him, Ning Kaichen would probably be the first to be attacked. Renbochin placed all his hopes on Ning Kaichen, which was why he made such a decision. After throwing the grenade, Renbochin covered his ears with one hand, slightly shrank his neck, and counted in his heart. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. The grenade exploded at the 5th count, setting off a mass of air waves. 2 wolves were directly blown away like ragged sacks. Their bodies were bleeding from head to toe, and it looked like they were about to die. There was another wolf that was slightly further away. Its body was also wounded and it fell to the ground, whimpering non-stop. The other wolves were shocked by the explosion and retreated with their tails between their legs. At the same time, the death of 2 wolves and the serious injury of 1 wolf shocked them and made them want to retreat. At this moment, Renbochin couldn't care less about them because Ning Kaichen, who was beside him, was still in the same position and had collapsed. At that moment, Renbochin cursed in his heart. Big brother, I'm still counting on you. Don't let anything happen to you. At the same time, fresh blood flowed down from Ning Kaichen's head. Chapter 110. At this moment, Renbochin really wanted to cry but had no tears. His biggest savior, his only hope of surviving for 10 minutes, had been knocked unconscious by his own grenade. What was going on? Didn't this grenade have a killing range of 5 to 10 meters? Ning Kaichen was about 14 to 15 meters away from the killing range. How could he be so unlucky? Renbochin felt that everything was going wrong for him. Ning Kaichen was also a fraud. After posing for so long, he was actually knocked unconscious by a stray bullet. Where is your sword? Where's your demeanor as a master? Now, Renbochin began to seriously consider whether these wolves would chase after him or directly drag Ning Kaichen away if he ran away. Sigh. Renbochin finally sighed faintly. In the end, he was too soft-hearted and felt embarrassed to leave Ning Kaichen behind. Fortunately, the wolves seemed to be frightened and retreated far away. They howled softly from time to time as if they were communicating with each other. It seemed like he still had some buffer time. Only one wolf was still standing in its original spot, glaring fiercely at him. All the other wolves have retreated, but you're the only one who refuses to retreat. What kind of grudge do you have against me? Renbochin looked at the wolf, raised his hand, and aimed at it. Thump. The wolf fell to the ground. I haven't fired yet. What are you doing? Renbochin carefully identified it for a long time before realizing that it was the one that he had shot with an anesthetic arrow at the beginning. It was just that the effects of the medicine were a little slow. He picked up the water bag and poured it on Ning Caichen's head. A moment later, Ning Caichen was awakened by the cold water. What just happened? Can you still use your sword? Ren Baqin was speechless. It was a blessing in disguise that Ning Caichen did not suffer a concussion. It was interrupted, but it shouldn't be too far from here. I'll summon it again. Ning Caichen's head was still stained with blood. His current posture was like that of a martyr. He crawled up from the ground and continued to pose. He raised one hand to the sky and shouted, "Sword, come." Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that Ning Caichen was fine. However, she was even more interested in Ning Caichen's sword. It even has precision guidance. Furthermore, they had only flown here from Great Xia for 10 minutes. Wasn't that already supersonic? He didn't know that there was such an advanced thing in this world. There were more and more unknowns in this world. Now, he could finally relax a little. The surrounding wolves still had no intention of attacking, and were surrounding him from afar. The rest was up to Ning Caichen. At the thought of this, Ren Baqin stuffed the last grenade back into his bag. After a while, Ren Baqin heard a loud noise coming from the horizon. It sounded like a fighter jet flying in the sky. A look of joy appeared on Ning Caichen's face. "Sword, come." Ren Baqin was moved. Such a big commotion. One had to know that this was a sword, not a plane. Planes were loud because they had engines. How did you make such a loud noise? At the same time, many aboriginals looked up at the sky. Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe sat on an open space in the forest. Not far from them was a pile of badly mutilated flesh and blood. From the broken fangs at the side of the pile of flesh and blood, one could tell the identity of this pile of flesh and blood. It was the wild boar that chased Ning Caichen to the ends of the earth. Are you stupid? How many times have I told you? Now that you've smashed that black fatty into this state, how are you going to report back? The tail or the two fangs? You're going to be laughed at when you get back. It's all your fault. Quan Yonghe used his finger to poke Quan Yonglin's head and gnashed his teeth. Quan Yonglin lowered his head and accepted the lesson. A few more wounds appeared on his body. The deepest wound was on his waist, and it almost cut his abdomen open. At this moment, a loud explosion sounded in the sky. Both of them frowned and looked up. What was that? In the depths of the forest, Hong Xian was sitting on a rock with her eyes closed. She held a long saber in her hand and was surrounded by babeast corpses. None of them were intact. However, these babeasts were much bigger than the ones that Ren Baqin had seen before. After hearing the sound, Hong Xian opened her eyes and looked up. Her eyes were filled with doubt at first. Then, she recalled something that she had heard before and suddenly asked, "Is this a sword slave?" There were many people like them. Du Chongkong was skinning a huge snake that was as thick as his waist. As he was skinning it, he hummed a tune from the mountains. When he heard the explosion in the sky, he looked around in bewilderment. Soon after, he found the source of the sound. At the foot of the mountain, many soldiers also looked up. One by one, the princes from the other 3 nations came out of their carriages. The Empress was originally eating grapes in the carriage. She had just plucked a grape and had yet to put it into her mouth when she heard the explosion. She immediately frowned. "Noisy. Give me the bow." She received a simple and crude longbow and a leather quiver from Hong Wuan. She stood up and walked out of the carriage. She raised her head and looked in the direction of the explosion. It was as if she could see through the night sky and see the long sword that was rumbling in the sky. She threw the quiver back and Hong Wuan hurriedly caught it. The Empress knocked an arrow and held a white bone arrow between her fingers. A majestic aura rose from her body. Everyone at the foot of the mountain felt this aura pressing down on their heads. Everyone subconsciously bowed in the direction of the Empress. Only the princes from the other 3 nations and some guards tried to resist. Plop. A few people couldn't resist and knelt on the ground. Other than a few who were confident in themselves, the rest also bowed in the direction of the Empress. At this moment, she wasn't just the Empress of Dayo. She was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. Bowing to the 7th most powerful expert in the world was a form of respect from the bottom of their hearts. The Empress pulled the bow to its fullest. The body of the bow was taut like a crescent moon. Then, she abruptly let go. When the bowstring rebounded, it produced a loud buzzing sound that reached everyone's ears. However, no one saw the arrow and it didn't make any sound. It disappeared in the Empress's hands just like that. After a while, a loud sound wave was heard. That arrow seemed to have shot through the air, and a series of explosions sounded in the sky. After shooting this arrow, the Empress didn't even look at it and turned around to return to the carriage. At this moment, there was nothing fancy in the air. It was a long sword that was wrapped in a simple green leather. It was flying at high speed and vibrating as it flew. It resonated with the surrounding air and created a loud sound wave. At the same time, the body of the sword let out a joyful cry, as if it was happy that its master had summoned it. It was also like a young girl in love who was going to meet her lover. In the next second, a long arrow made of white bone appeared in front of it. With its huge inertia, it couldn't dodge in time. Clang! The two collided, and a crisp and clear sound was heard. That long sword somersaulted countless times in the air before falling to the ground. Only when it was about to land on the ground did it stagger and stabilize its body. It let out a sorrowful cry as it flew shakily toward the mountains. Compared to the momentum it had when it first arrived, one was a young mistress returning home after marrying a tycoon, while the other was a little wife in a commoner's district who was bullied. Renbaqian was waiting for Ning Caichen's sword to descend from the sky with a brilliant sword aura. He was already considering whether he should hug this thick thigh in time. In his opinion, Ning Caichen was the main character. However, at this moment, a series of explosions sounded in the sky. Following which, the sound wave of the long sword disappeared. There was no trace of the long sword that he had expected to fly over with a brilliant sword aura. What's wrong now? Renbaqian asked subconsciously. Ning Caichen was also perplexed. Strange, why isn't it here yet? Scammer, Renbaqian couldn't help but curse. Ning Caichen raised his head with a blank look on his face. What exactly was going on? Fortunately, the surrounding wolves didn't have any intention of attacking. After waiting for a few minutes, a long sword finally swayed in the sky and descended as if it was drunk. It actually flew over. But why do I feel that something is amiss? Even if there wasn't a brilliant sword aura, it should at least be a ray of cold light that flew over from the sky, right? Why does it look like it's drunk? This thought emerged in Renbaqian's mind. Ning Caichen raised his hand, and the long sword swayed as it flew into his hand. When Ning Caichen saw the few cracks on the body of the sword, his face was filled with heartache. When the long sword landed in his hand, it let out a low cry as if it was complaining about its tragic experience. Ning Caichen immediately burst into tears. Seeing his sad look, Renbaqian couldn't help but ask, what happened? Chapter 111. Renbaqian looked at the shabbily dressed Ning Caichen, who was crying while holding onto the sword. His heart was filled with, what the f***ck, is this even possible? Tonight's drama came one after another. From the sound of the sword, to Ning Caichen being blasted unconscious, to the arrival of the flying sword, the plot was simply full of twists and turns. Although he didn't know where this sword was originally located in Great Xia, Lan City wasn't close to the border. For it to fly here in 10 minutes, it should be at least at the speed of sound, right? Such a small sword that was flying at the speed of sound was actually shot down by an arrow. It gave Rinpochen the feeling that a fighter jet was shot down by an arrow. It was enough to make the entire earth tremble. Putting aside the fact that this sword could fly by itself and be accurately guided, the fact that it was shot down by an arrow was more shocking to Rinpochen than the flying sword itself. However, such a thing really happened in front of him. Rinpochen looked at the sword in Ning Caichen's hand. There was a small dot in the middle of the sword, and there were cracks extending outwards from that dot. It gave people the feeling that this sword would shatter with a light knock. Previously, when this sword came down, there was a rumbling sound in the air. However, after a series of explosions, the rumbling sound disappeared. At this time, the only person who could do such a thing and shoot it down with an arrow was probably the Empress. He didn't know whether the Empress knew how to shoot arrows, but in terms of strength, since she was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, she definitely had the ability to shoot arrows. Thinking of this, Rinpochen was almost certain that the sword was shot down by the Empress. For example, he had seen Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe in action before. Even though they could shock him, it was like comparing heaven and earth to this. Even if other people were stronger than them, they wouldn't be that much stronger. It was also impossible for the Imperial Guards to have such strength. It could only be the Empress, and she was probably in a bad mood. Just like those unlucky people who went to challenge the Empress last year. Thinking of this, Rinpochen looked at Ning Caichen with some pity. He had to admit that he was really miserable. Even though Rinpochen didn't understand anything, it wasn't hard to imagine how precious this sword was. When he encountered a life-threatening situation, he summoned the sword over and actually met the Empress, who was in a bad mood. In the end, he ended up like this. Rinpochen now had the leisure to daydream. Just now, when the sword flew over, those wolves seemed to have sensed something and retreated into the darkness, leaving behind 2 corpses and 2 severely injured wolves. Ning Caichen cried for a long time before Rinpochen patted him on the shoulder and lamented, "My condolences." Ning Caichen cried even more miserably when he heard this. Rinpochen felt that it was better to let him cry on his own for a while. It's not a sin for a man to cry. Since Rinpochen had nothing to do, he filled the magazine of his pistol with bullets and sat there in a daze. After a long time, Ning Caichen finally calmed down. He stroked the blade of the sword with a lifeless look on his face. Rinpochen then asked curiously, "Can this sword be restored? I need a large amount of materials to recover." Ning Caichen's face was gloomy. "That's good." Rinpochen comforted her. "It's good that you can recover." Ning Caichen continued to feel depressed. "You are a sword immortal?" Rinpochen asked again. At the very least, the ability to summon a sword from Great Xia with a shout was awesome. "I'm just a sword slave." Ning Caichen shook his head bitterly. "Why do you say so?" Rinpochen asked curiously. He was still very interested. "You haven't heard of it?" Ning Caichen turned to look at him. Seeing him nod his head, he lowered his head and stroked the sword again. "There's a sword mountain in this world. There are 3,000 spirit swords on it, and green bead is one of them. Every once in a while, a spirit sword will sense the birth of a person who meets the requirements and will automatically fly out from the sword mountain to the person who meets the requirements. Others call these people chosen by spirit sword masters and are extremely envious of them. In fact, we are just sword slaves." Rinpochen and Ning Caichen exchanged questions and answers. Ning Caichen didn't hide anything about sword masters and let Rinpochen understand what was going on. Only then did he know that it wasn't easy to be a sword master. Being chosen by a spirit sword was a good thing in a certain sense. One didn't need to practice and could become a famous expert with a spirit sword in hand. Furthermore, depending on the spirit sword in hand, one's strength would also be different. Among them, the weakest was an earth will expert and was even stronger than an ordinary earth will expert. This was an achievement that most practitioners could only dream of in their lifetime. However, in this world, there were gains and losses. This saying couldn't be more true when it came to sword masters. First of all, they couldn't practice. It was unknown whether they were chosen by spirit swords because they had a special constitution that prevented them from practicing. There had never been a sword master who could practice. At most, they could only practice some simple martial arts. Other than that, they were no different from ordinary people. For example, Ning Kaichen was like this. If he had a spirit sword in hand, he would be an expert above the earth will level. Even most earth will experts wouldn't be his match. If he didn't have a spirit sword in hand, he was no different from an ordinary person, which was why he was in such a sorry state. Secondly, if a sword master always carried a sword with him, he rarely lived a long life. This was because the spirit sword would absorb the sword master's essence. It wasn't a big deal in a short period of time, but it would damage his lifespan over a long period of time. The earliest sword masters rarely lived more than 40 years old. Therefore, even though others called them sword masters, they generally thought of themselves as sword slaves. As the name suggested, they were like slaves of spirit swords. Even though spirit swords could make them stronger, they had to pay a huge price. Later on, an extremely talented person developed a type of sword nurturing pool. He built a pool according to a specific method and threw all kinds of precious materials into it to nurture the sword. In this way, apart from reducing the sword master's essence and lifespan, he could also use some special materials to enhance the power of the spirit sword, which was equivalent to increasing the sword master's strength. These materials included minerals, plants, and even the blood of some specific animals. A special liquid was also required. However, the characteristics and preferences of every spirit sword were different. Other than the special liquid used to nurture the sword, the other materials were not the same. Most of the time, the sword master had to personally go to the wilderness to try his luck and find materials that matched the spirit sword. Because the two materials were actually companions, the sword master would immediately know when he found a suitable material. Ning Caichen's spirit sword was nurtured in the sword nurturing pool. If he encountered any danger, he could just summon the spirit sword. If he was near the sword nurturing pool, the spirit sword could reach him in an instant. He came to Dayo to look for opportunities and exchange some things. He didn't expect to be so unlucky. Green bead was shot down by an arrow just as it was about to reach him. Furthermore, it was so badly damaged that he didn't know how long it would take for it to recover. It could be said that he lost everything. No wonder Ning Kaichen looked like he had nothing to live for. Ignoring the downcast Ning Kaichen, Renbaqian felt that this world was getting more and more exciting. There were too many unknowns in this world and too many places that made Renbaqian feel mysterious. The veil on the surface of this world was already so exciting. Renbaqian didn't know what else was underneath. Chapter 112. Where is the Sword Mountain? Renbaqian asked. No one knows. Every sword slave knows that there is such a sword mountain. Countless people want to explore it, but no one has ever found it, Ning Kaichen replied. Renbaqian thought about it and felt that this world needed a satellite. It was a pity that he didn't have money. He felt that he would eventually have money. However, he couldn't bring such a big thing over. At the very least, he didn't bring his bed over. He didn't know if it was because of the mattress and bed sheets, but he always brought the bed sheets over and back. However, it was useless even if he brought them over. There was no launching device, no operating platform, and no debugging staff. How was he going to launch the satellite into the sky? Do spirit swords always choose newborn children? Most of the time. Some people get it later, but it's rare. Are spirit swords alive? Renbochin had always been curious about this. They are also alive, but they are different from us. The sword slaves could empathize with the pain and suffering they had suffered. If they are destroyed, the sword slaves will die too. Ning Kaichen stroked the sword. The green bead trembled slightly as if it was communicating with him. They can feel the pain when they are hurt. Of course, they will convey their inner feelings to the sword slaves. For example, I feel pain all over my body now. Ning Kaichen continued to look aggrieved. Renbochin felt that half of his expression was due to the pain. How many sword masters are there? I'm not sure. Usually, there are only about 100 of them. Only when the world is in chaos will more sword masters be born. According to records, thousands of years ago, there were thousands of sword masters in the world at the same time. That was a magnificent era. Countless heroes moved unhindered in the world. Just thinking about it makes one fascinated. Speaking of that magnificent era, Ning Caichen's eyes lit up. He had always yearned for that era. However, when he thought of the green bead being shot down halfway, he immediately lost all his thoughts. His eyes dimmed, and his whole body emitted a miserable feeling. Renbochin was filled with fantasies and expectations for this world while Ning Kaichen was dejected. The aboriginals on the mountain continued to do what they were supposed to do. Some people thought of something from the voice just now, but most of them didn't understand. Nowadays, the sword master rarely appeared. Most of them were in Great Xia, so the aboriginals didn't know much about him. Everyone at the foot of the mountain also went back to rest. Many of them had guessed what the sound was, but they didn't know what happened after Qi Zixiao shot that arrow. His guess was that someone was unlucky. The Empress was reclining in the carriage with a thick layer of animal skin under her. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were massaging her legs and shoulders respectively. The Empress was drinking wine by herself. Your Majesty, what was that sound just now? Hong Yuan asked softly. As the Empress's maid, she was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still very curious about the situation just now. Hearing Hong Yuan's question, Qing Yuan also pricked up her ears. It's just a small bug. It's too noisy and disturbed me, the Empress said casually. Seeing that the Empress wasn't going to say much, the two of them didn't probe further. If Ning Kaichen and Green Bead heard what the Empress said, they would probably be heartbroken. If Green Bead was a little more low-key and didn't nag so much, she probably wouldn't be in such a miserable state now. Whether it was as a person or as a sword, sometimes it was better to keep a low profile. Nothing else happened that night. After going through all kinds of things for the day, Renbochin was already extremely tired. In the middle of the night, he added some branches to the bonfire, leaving Ning Kaichen, whose entire body was in pain, to lie on the ground and fall asleep. His body was covered with pebbles. After lying on the ground for a long time, his entire body was in pain. Even so, he didn't care anymore. It was obvious that the events of the day had caused him to be exhausted. His body was tired, and so was his heart. Renbochin was awoken by the cold. The sky was already bright, and a layer of white fog had risen in the surroundings. He sat up from the ground and realized that the water vapor in the forest had wet his clothes. The bonfire had also been extinguished. No wonder it was so cold. Ning Kaichen was hugging his sword. His eyes were already closed, but his eyebrows were still tightly knitted. Renbochin got up and tried to search the bonfire. There wasn't a single spark, and he couldn't be bothered to torment himself. He just hugged his arms and waited for daybreak. Thinking that he would be able to leave the mountain in a while, Renbochin felt elated. The most dangerous night was finally over. After an hour, Ning Kaichen woke up as well. After waking up this time, she was more or less normal. At least, she didn't look like a resentful woman anymore. Wait a while more. start a fire and cook something to eat. After that, we will leave the mountain before noon, Renbochin said. Ning Kaichin nodded his head and continued to hug his sword. When the sun rose from afar, the fog in the mountain had lessened. Renbochin then went to the surrounding area to pick up some tree branches. He started a fire and roasted the meat. When the meat was done, it was already 7 or 8 o'clock. Both of them ate a simple meal and got up to leave the mountain. Renbochin was still holding a crossbow in one hand and a tree branch in the other, alerting the enemy in the forest. On the other hand, Ning Kaichin was hugging his sword with both hands, looking like a sunset warrior as he followed behind him. Renbochin walked along the stream. When he saw the stall of Lao Gonma from yesterday, Renbochin's gaze swept across it. Immediately, he ran over and used a tree branch to search the stall. Soon after, he carefully took out something from the stall. When Ning Kaichin saw the thing in Renbochin's hand, a disgusted look appeared on his face. Renbochin didn't dislike it. If he didn't see wrongly, this should be that thing, right? The saber-toothed tiger's penis could also be considered as a tiger's penis, right? This good thing wasn't smashed. He was really lucky. He could take it back and give it to Chin Ching. That guy should need this treasure. At this moment, on the way down the mountain, Renbochin didn't have the same look of bitterness and hatred as yesterday. Instead, he started to think about other things. After washing it in the stream, Renbochin started to think about how to bring it back. He couldn't carry it in his hands. There were some other things in his waist bag. If he put this thing in, it would get dirty. Brother, help me carry it down the mountain. I can't carry it in my hands. Renbochin put on a smile and asked Ning Kaichin. Ning Kaichin's face twitched. His head was like a rattle drum. Renbochin saw that Ning Kaichin wouldn't touch it even if he killed him. He couldn't bear to throw it away either. Hence, he tore a strip of cloth from his body and rolled it up before stuffing it into his waist bag. Originally, his clothes were torn in many places in the forest. Furthermore, he tore it twice. At this moment, he looked like a beggar. He and the ragged Ning Kaichin were like a pair of brothers in hardship. The path down the mountain was much easier than going up the mountain. After walking for a while, they started to see figures. Du Chongkong was carrying a mace on his back. He was holding a ball in both his hands and sprinting away. His speed was quite fast. Before Renbochin could say anything, Du Chongkong had already run far away. Not long after, Renbochin saw someone carrying a toothed tiger that had already died. It was one size bigger than the one from yesterday. However, its head was smashed like a sakuma. When Renbochin saw the many mounts and carriages at the edge of the forest, tears started to well up in his eyes. He finally got out of this godforsaken forest alive. At the foot of the mountain, he saw that the nearby open space was filled with all kinds of prey. There was even someone recording at the side. The two of them came out empty-handed. When the others saw them, they didn't care. Quan Yonghe and Quan Yonglin came out from behind them. Quan Yonghe's face was filled with unhappiness while Quan Yonglin was laughing dryly. The two of them were also empty-handed. Quan Yonglin had a few more wounds on his body. Especially his waist, it was dyed red with blood. Renbochin turned around and looked at the two of them. Needless to say, even if they encountered prey, they would have been smashed into smithereens by Quan Yonglin. Without caring about anything else, Renbochin ran to report to the Empress in his dirty clothes. This time, it was a form of punishment for him to spend the night on the mountain. Only by making himself look more miserable would people sympathize with him. Your Majesty, I almost couldn't make it back this time. Upon seeing the Empress, Renbochin immediately started to lament. Chapter 113. Why do I remember that Deputy Ren went on a killing spree? The Empress's cold voice was heard. Ren Baqin froze. What did the Empress mean? Did she know that he killed Lian Baoqing? Otherwise, why would she say such a thing? Ren Baqin's mind was filled with thoughts. At this moment, he didn't know how to reply. The Empress's following words made him feel as if he had been granted amnesty. Forget it, I won't hold you responsible for this matter. Go and tidy up. You have embarrassed yourself by looking like this, the Empress continued. Thank you, Your Majesty. Ren Baqin quickly retreated and didn't dare to mention anything else. After he left, Ren Baqin was almost certain that the Empress already knew about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said those last words. In that case, he could be considered worry-free, and others wouldn't dig it out in the future. Naturally, he didn't know that the Empress already knew what he had done. After he left, the Empress thought of how Ren Baqin came in with a miserable appearance and complained tearfully. Then, he was frightened by her words. She found it amusing and laughed, what a crafty fellow. I have to knock him down a peg. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan looked at each other with smiles on their faces. When other people saw the Empress, they would tidy up cleanly. Who would come crying miserably like Deputy Ren? However, it was a good thing that Her Majesty wasn't in a bad mood every time she saw Deputy Ren. Following which, the Empress called Axayanzhou over and said, if anyone asks about Lian Baoqing, just say that he overestimated himself and provoked a ferocious beast, causing his corpse to be swallowed. It was just an aristocratic family from Great Xia. They could even kill the envoy from the Yun nation, so why would they care about an aristocratic family from Great Xia? She was even a little interested in the tool that Wu Fang mentioned that Ren Baqin used at that time. With her strength, she naturally wouldn't care about this kind of thing. Furthermore, from Wu Fang's description, she knew that this kind of thing was difficult to mass-produce. In that case, it wouldn't be as useful as some swords and sabers. However, this storyteller Ren really had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Everyone's mounts were watched by the stream. Ren Baqin's mountain-gazing bird was pushed to the outermost and was far away. The main reason was that there were many ferocious beasts, and it would tremble whenever it got close. Ren Baqin went to the stream to wash himself. Then, he went to the side and took down the sleeping bag from the mountain-gazing bird. His official robe was placed inside. After changing into his official robes, Ren Baqin looked much more refreshed. After changing his clothes, he lay on the grass for a short while before he was called to roast some meat for the Empress. He also roasted a piece of meat for himself. At this time, the people on the mountain gradually came down. At the same time, the top 3 of the Great Hunt had been selected. The first one was called Tao Meng, and the prey he brought back was a creature with horns on its head that looked like a leopard. It was called the Guardian Beast, and it was said that it specialized in guarding strange flowers and plants. It was as fast as lightning, and its strength was not small either. For example, saber-toothed tigers and the like were its food. Many people asked Tao Meng what good items he had found. After all, if he had hunted down a guardian, he would definitely have taken whatever it was guarding. The second one was Shiwanya, who brought back a monkey with golden fur all over its body. It was about 2/3 the size of a human, and it was still alive. It was tied up tightly. From the tone of the others, this monkey was also very powerful and could understand human nature. If he was nurtured well, he would be a good helper in the future. The third was Hong Wu's granddaughter, Hong Xian. Ren Baqin roasted the meat while watching the bustle. After the rankings were finalized and presented to the Empress, everyone started to prepare lunch and pack up their things at the same time. After lunch, everyone started to return. Along the way, someone mentioned that Lian Baoqing of the Lian family was missing. Previously, some people thought that he was thinking about the reward given by the Empress, so he brought an Earth-will level bodyguard to the mountains to hunt. After all, He had always been arrogant, so it was not strange for him to do such a thing. However, he had not appeared yet, and everyone felt that something was amiss. He overestimated himself and challenged the beast. Even his bodyguard was swallowed by it, Enchanting announced to everyone. After hearing this, even if some people felt that something was amiss, they didn't say anything more. After all, he wasn't related to Lian Baoqing. Dayo had already given this explanation. Regardless of what was going on behind his back, it was the Lian family's business. They didn't know if the Lian family, which had always been domineering, would swallow this loss. Even if they didn't want to eat it, there was nothing they could do. Did they really dare to ask Qi Zixiao to give them an explanation? After hearing this, Ren Baqian was once again sure that the Empress already knew about what happened in the forest. Otherwise, Enchanting wouldn't have said this. It was obvious that the Empress had suppressed the matter. After all, Enchanting had come forward to explain that in the future, they would look for the Empress if they had any problems. This outcome made him heave a sigh of relief. In the future, no one would dig up this matter. Otherwise, it would be a slap to the Empress's face. Otherwise, if the Lian family knew the truth, even though he wouldn't dare to do anything in Dayo, they would just have to send a few assassins to deal with him, and he would be in big trouble. At this moment, Ren Baqian was rather grateful. There weren't many leaders who could take the blame for their subordinates. This thigh was indeed the right one to hug. In the afternoon, everyone returned to Lan City. There wasn't anyone to welcome them, but when the Empress's carriage entered the city, there were still many aboriginal commoners cheering at the side. When everyone arrived at the plaza in front of the palace, the Empress's carriage directly entered the palace. Only then did everyone disperse in twos and threes. Ren Baqian didn't care about anything else and directly returned to the Beast Park. When he saw Tian Tian and Gun Gun, he hugged them and rubbed his face against them. It was great to be back. After a while, Ren Baqian put the things back into the house with a claw mark on his face. However, before he could even sit down, he was called into the palace. "Do you remember that you said you prepared 2 menus?" the Empress asked. Yes, Ren Baqian lowered his head and replied. Even though he was very grateful to the Empress in the afternoon, he still felt a little guilty now. "Let's just choose the unusual menu. These people are too daring. They dare to do anything," the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Ren Baqian complied and immediately retreated. He only heaved a sigh of relief when he was outside. He pondered in his heart, those people shouldn't have committed any crimes recently, right? Even though there were some small scuffles, they shouldn't have committed any major crimes. Why did the Empress find them an eyesore? Ren Baqian pondered for a long time. Could it be that Lian Baoqing tried to assassinate him? After thinking about it, it was highly possible. Hearing the Empress say that she didn't blame him, the Empress should be very clear about the situation at that time. To assassinate a Dayo official right under the eyes of the Empress, this wasn't just bold, it was practically soaring to the heavens. Now that Lian Baoqing was dead, the Empress directly vented her anger on others. Ren Baqian felt that this was the most likely reason. Or it could be that he didn't know what happened on the day he returned to Earth to buy a gun. However, there were still the big shots in the imperial court. The Empress didn't say that she was going to cook 2 types of banquet dishes. In that case, the big shots in the imperial court would also cook the same dishes. He must never let them know that he was the one who designed the menu. Otherwise, it would be hard to guarantee that he wouldn't make things difficult for himself. Ren Baqian pondered as he arrived at the entrance of the imperial kitchen. He simply didn't want to think about it anymore. In any case, whatever the Empress said would be the same. When everyone in the imperial kitchen saw Ren Baqian, they greeted one after another, "Brother Ren. The menu has been decided. It's the second set of dishes. That interesting dish will be used tomorrow." Are the ingredients ready? Ren Baqian asked. When the others heard this, they revealed a look of anticipation. I can get someone to send it over anytime, Caretaker Go said in a deep voice. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Chapter 114. After Ren Baqian left the palace, another person entered the palace. He was about 40 to 50 years old and looked very ordinary. He was the kind of person that would be hard to spot in a crowd. He was wearing ordinary clothes made of coarse cloth. His height was average among the aboriginals, about 1.7 meters. However, he stood there like a towering mountain, giving off an unshakable vibe. Your Majesty! The burly man cupped his fists and shouted loudly. Someone, give the General-in-Chief who supports the nation a seat of honor. The Empress had a rare gentle smile on her face. All these years, she only behaved like this when she saw the General-in-Chief who supports the nation, Hongwu. The Empress was only 16 years old when she ascended to the throne. It was very difficult for a 16-year-old girl to sit in this position. Countless people in Dao, Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation stared at her. At that time, her strength was far from being able to look down on the world. It was all thanks to the General-in-Chief who supports the nation, Hongwu, that she was able to secure her position. The General-in-Chief who supports the nation was conferred by the late emperor. From this, one could see the late emperor's expectations of Hongwu. Hongwu did not disappoint the late emperor. Therefore, to the Empress, Hongwu was like an uncle and the only person she could rely on. 7 years had passed, and this relationship had been preserved until now. Every year, when the Empress celebrated her birthday, Hongwu would come to the palace for a chat after returning from the north. To the Empress, this was a rare moment of warmth. Your Majesty is getting more and more powerful, and I am also getting older. Hongwu smiled after sitting down. He looked at the Empress with a gentle gaze that even Hong Xian rarely saw. The General-in-Chief is no different from 10 years ago. The Empress smiled as she sat on the couch. Qinghuan, fill up the General-in-Chief's cup. Hongwu said, even though my face hasn't changed, time is unforgiving. I am indeed old. Then, he took the cup and drank it in one gulp while laughing heartily. Thank you for the wine, Your Majesty. Fill it up again. This cup is for the General-in-Chief. Great Xia only dared not act rashly because you were stationed in the north. Great Xia has worked hard and made great contributions. The Empress finished speaking and drank the wine in one gulp. After the toast, the two of them began to talk about other things. I feel that Great Xia will not be content with their lot in the future. The Emperor of the Great Xia dynasty is very ambitious. After ascending to the throne, he has been working hard for many years. Now that the strength of the Great Xia dynasty is far greater than before, I'm afraid he has some ideas, Hongwu said. Then, he said with some regret, back then, before he succeeded the throne, I wanted to kill him at the border. Unfortunately, he escaped. The Empress nodded her head slightly and said, I'm afraid that they are making preparations. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble Great General next. If Ren Baqian heard their conversation, he would know why Great Xia sent that white bear over. Although Great Xia has a large number of elite soldiers, the aboriginal warriors aren't afraid of them. If they come, I'll show them what I've got, Hongwu said heroically. I will send an order to the mountains to recruit 20,000 soldiers. The Empress nodded. One had to know that even the ordinary aboriginal warriors weren't weak. After undergoing training, their strength far surpassed that of the elite soldiers of Great Xia. In terms of individual strength, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he could fight against 20 people alone. Furthermore, this was under the circumstances that Dao lacked armor and weapons. However, a duel in the army wasn't a simple matter. Currently, Dao had a total of 90,000 soldiers. Among them, 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast guarded the border with the Yun Nation. 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Southeast guarded the border with the Qin Nation. 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North guarded the border with Great Xia in the north. The remaining 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the whole of Dayo. However, these 100,000 elite soldiers were the foundation of Dayo over the years. It could be said that all the taxes collected by Dayo in the south were used to support these 100,000 elite soldiers. The most elite soldiers were the 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North. However, the equipment of these 30,000 elite soldiers was far inferior to that of Great Xia's. They completely relied on their valiant individual strength to firmly suppress the 200,000 soldiers on the opposite side. However, if Great Xia really wanted to attack Dayo, they could deploy at least 500,000 soldiers. 30,000 soldiers against 500,000 soldiers. Their equipment were inferior to that of the other party. Furthermore, under the circumstances that they were defending, even Hongwu couldn't do anything. After all, the other party could choose to break through in any direction, but it was impossible for Hongwu to defend only one place. Now that the Empress had recruited another 20,000 soldiers, Hongwu could have more cards in his hands. At least, he could maintain a considerable number of soldiers at each pass. This was already the best she could do. It was difficult to equip the weapons of these 20,000 soldiers in a short period of time. Great Xia's storehouse could be said to be poor. However, she immediately thought of Ren Baqin. This fellow had a lot of tricks up his sleeves and knew a lot of things. She wondered if he could be of some use in this aspect. In fact, Ren Baqin had mentioned smelting a few times before. However, he was usually referring to forging. The Empress didn't understand what he meant and didn't take it to heart. If Ren Baqin had said from the start that he could smelt more iron and forge more weapons, he wouldn't have been nearly killed. Now, the Empress thought that it would be best if Ren Baqin could be of some help in this aspect. Even if he couldn't, he could get some other things out and use the channels to exchange for some weapons from the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation. At present, he should still be able to get some from the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation. If Great Xia really made a move, she was afraid that it would be really difficult to get more from the outside world. Not only weapons, but salt, rations, and the like were also the same. Fortunately, Great Xia should still be in the preparatory stage and there was still some time. Your Majesty, you have to pay attention to the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation, Hongwu said again. The Empress nodded. She understood that Dayo was different from the other three nations because the aboriginals were different from them. Naturally, the nations that they established were different as well. It was just like a wolf sneaking into a flock of sheep. The Yun Nation and the Qin Nation had been feeling uneasy about Dayo for a long time. Dayo even almost attacked the capital of the Yun Nation. If Great Xia wanted to send troops, it was impossible that they didn't send people to contact them first. If the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation attacked together, it would indeed be somewhat dangerous. After talking about national affairs, Hongwu and the Empress talked about other things. Most of them talked about the past and reminisced about the past. Both of them chatted rather happily and laughed out loud from time to time. Just as the Empress was in high spirits, Hongwu looked at her and sighed. "Great General, what's the matter?" the Empress asked. Hongwu had always been like a tall mountain that everyone looked up to. She had never seen him sigh like this before. Your Majesty ascended the throne at the age of 16. It has been 7 years since then, and you have grown from a frail young lady to an empress that is praised by the people of the world. I am very gratified to see that your Majesty has grown over the years. However, your Majesty is now 23 years old, and you have to have a descendant. When Hongwu said this, he immediately turned into an old man who was worried about his wife. He even brought up his seniority. The Empress's face immediately turned ugly. The year before last, Hongwu used all kinds of methods to celebrate her birthday. This year, he changed to playing the emotional card. She shouldn't have asked him that question and let him perform his own one-man show. Your Majesty, I don't have many years left. Before I leave, I still want to see Your Majesty get married. Besides, I am not the only one who is anxious. The entire imperial court is anxious. Hongwu continued to sigh. He sighed while looking at the Empress's face. He wasn't even so worried about his own granddaughter. However, he couldn't not worry about the person in front of him. Back then, the former emperor entrusted his granddaughter to him. Now, the Empress was doing well in other aspects, was stronger than him, and was doing well in other areas. However, he still couldn't let go of this matter. Outsiders would never think that the number 9 in the world and number 7 in the world would actually sit together to discuss this matter. The Empress immediately frowned. Originally, she was in a good mood when she saw Hongwu. It was also very heartwarming to talk about the past with him, but her mood immediately turned sour when he mentioned this matter. If it wasn't for the fact that Hongwu was in front of her, she would have directly thrown him out. 2 days ago, everyone in the imperial court had talked about this matter. Today, Hongwu brought it up again, which really annoyed her. Chapter 115. I started writing in May last year, and this is my second book. How should I put it? People who write books have a story in their hearts that they want to describe and tell people. Every book is a magnificent world, and it's all about love and hate. It's the same for this book. To be honest, the opening of this book wasn't smooth. The editor told me bluntly that this type of book is more difficult to produce results. There have been books with this style in the past, but they didn't have good results. However, I have such a story in my heart, such a character, and I want to tell her. Therefore, in the end, I insisted on my own ideas and wrote this book. After publishing the book, the results weren't too good at first. I was quite nervous, afraid that it would fail. After all, telling the story I wanted to tell was out of feelings, but feelings can't be eaten. I still have to support my family. Up until now, this book has done a lot better than I expected at the beginning, which made me relieved. I can continue to tell this story that I like. First of all, I would like to thank all my friends for their support. Without your support, I definitely wouldn't have been able to persevere. I have mentioned the reason before. Secondly, I would like to thank the editor, Wudong. Although he wasn't very optimistic about this theme, he didn't reduce the support he gave me and gave me enough recommendation spots. Now, I have close to 38,000 subscribers. It's time to check the results when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'm taking more than 30,000 subscribers. You won't embarrass me too much, right? If the subscription ratio is too low, I really won't have the face to see others. I hope that all my friends can support me if possible. Only by supporting the original can there be people immersed in fantasy telling stories that they like, instead of following the trend for money. Speaking of the issue of updating, this book is taking much longer than I expected. Maybe I care too much about it, so I keep writing and deleting, causing the speed to be unable to speed up. I only have the next day's draft in my hands every day. I'll give it my all when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'll guarantee 5 chapters at least. If the initial subscriptions exceed my expectations and reach 3,000 subscribers, I'll add 2 more chapters. The Alliance leader will add 4 chapters, the sect leader will add 2 chapters, and the 3 branch leaders will add 1 chapter. That's about it. If I can't add them tomorrow, I'll continue adding them the day after, and the day after that, until I make up for the number. Chapter 116. The next day, Renbochin strolled to the Honglu bureau early in the morning. The Empress's birthday celebration was today. After that, his mission would be considered complete. He really did not have much interest in the position of Honglu deputy. When he returned to Earth at night, he would bring back some good stuff. At that time, he would look for Du Chongkong to exchange for martial arts. Who knows, he might be able to become an expert or something. He was looking forward to the cultivation techniques of this world. Now, he could only hope that he could learn the cultivation techniques of this world. After all, people from two different worlds might have some differences in their bodies. That would be terrible. Qi Heng and Qi Xing, who were guarding the door, were still respectful towards Renbachien. Even though it wasn't a secret that Renbachien was only hanging here temporarily, Renbachien had indeed done a good job in the Honglu Bureau. These days, there weren't many troubles at the Honglu Bureau. As a result, the people at the Honglu Bureau were rather respectful towards Renbachien. Renbachien was rather pleased with the attitude of the people in the Honglu Bureau. However, the Aboriginals were well aware of their own situation. In reality, the Aboriginals were overbearing but not ruthless enough. Even though it was a deterrent to the people from other nations, they wouldn't be too heavy-handed since they were here to celebrate the Empress's birthday. In addition, Qi Ji's own strength was very high, so he could easily deal with the other party. He just had to beat them until they were convinced. That was why he had broken the legs of 4 people last year, but he was still playing tricks on them. However, Renbachien was different. He did not have the strength to truss a chicken and did not have any foundation in Deo. If he could not suppress them, he was afraid that he would have to revolve around them every day. He would not be able to get any benefits from the Empress either. The ruthless methods he used and the even more unscrupulous behavior he displayed afterwards were the real reason why they tucked their tails between their legs. It didn't mean that he was much better at handling things than the original Qi Ji. Renbachien returned to his room. Not long after, someone came over and handed Renbachien a token. This was the name list for tonight's banquet. The other people who were invited to attend the banquet had already received the token. Renbachien was the only one who had gone missing for a day and then went to participate in the Great Hunt. This token was only given to him today. Renbachien fiddled with the token. He had already prepared the gift for the Empress. The last time he came back, he had also brought it back. There shouldn't be any problem. On Earth, it was not expensive, but here, it should be high-end and of a higher grade. It was not inferior to the precious items given by others. Furthermore, there was an exceptional bootlicker attached to the gift. He reckoned that the Empress would like it. After sitting for a while, Renbachien recalled that no one had told him what to wear. He got up and went to Gu Daxiong's room. He heard a deafening snoring at the door. It was really comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. This period of time was the most troublesome in the past years, but this year, he had nothing to do with it. Sir Gu. Renbachien knocked on the door and shouted. A moment later, a voice came from inside, "What's the matter? Come in." When Renbachien entered, Gu Daxiong was sitting on a chair with his arms crossed. "Sir Gu, may I know what to wear to the banquet?" Renbachien cupped his fists and asked. Gu Daxiong scratched his head. "Of course it's the gown." Soon after, he remembered that Renbachien didn't know much about these things, so he said, "Go to Jingyang Road and look for a Gucci clothing store. You can make formal attire there. You are now secondary class, rank 6, and the color is grass green." "Thank you, Sir Gu, but can you get someone to bring me there?" Renbachien asked again. Fortunately, he had asked. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that Deo had gowns, let alone where to get one. He hoped that there would be ready-made clothes in the clothing store so that he wouldn't be held up. "Look for Gu Shou and get him to get someone to bring you there." Gu Daxiong waved his hand and yawned. A moment later, Renbachien was led by someone to the entrance of a shop on Jingyang Road. "Deputy Ren, this is the place." Tell them your position and they will know, the person who led the way said to Rinpoche and left in a hurry. There weren't many people in the shop. Some ready-made clothes were hung on the rack. After all, the others were already prepared. No one was like Rinpoche, who participated in the exercise at night and came to make the formal attire in the afternoon. There were 2 Aboriginal ladies leaning on the counter. There was a burly man sitting beside them. When they saw Rinpoche enter in his official attire, the 2 ladies immediately perked up. "Sir, what do you want to buy?" "Formal attire for the banquet." "Can you make it?" Rinpoche asked. "I just need to make some alterations. It will be ready in 4 hours." One of the ladies said, "Sir, please follow me." It was around 9 in the morning. 4 hours was equivalent to 1 in the afternoon. He could make it in time. After Rinpoche entered, there was a lady who was either from the Yun Nation, the Chin Nation, or Great Xia. She was standing at one side with a ruler in her hand. Rinpoche stretched out his arm and allowed her to measure his measurements. He was trying to guess which country this lady was from. After all, the people from those 3 countries were similar. Only the people from the Chin Nation were slightly darker. There was also a possibility that she was a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation. In fact, the Aboriginals didn't look much different from them. They were just a little more boorish. The difference in body size was huge. After explaining his position, Rinpoche left and returned to the Honglu Bureau. He stayed there until the afternoon before collecting his formal attire and returning to the Beast Park. Dayo's formal attire was very simple and didn't have many decorations. It was just a buttoned robe with the left side pressing down on the right side and extending all the way to the armpit. The buttoned and cuffs were all made of red cloth with floral patterns. Other than the buttoned front, waist, and cuffs, this formal attire was entirely green. The lower part of the attire was a little lower than the knees and a pair of green pants were required. Other things didn't matter to Rinpoche, but the color of this formal attire gave him a headache. Even if it was dark green, it would be good. After wearing this formal attire, he immediately felt that he was as green as the prairie of Hohot. Rinpoche carried out a wooden box that was half the height of a person. The box was made of wood and was wrapped in craft paper. The surrounding area was wrapped with soft paper. This was the birthday gift for the Empress. After checking the items, Rinpoche went out and wandered around. He found Tai Dao and Tinghulu. When they saw him, they praised him. "Sir Ren, you look really handsome in this formal attire. Stop flattering me. In a while, the 2 of you will change into clean clothes and help me move these things to the front gate of the palace," Rinpoche said. He was already so green, how could he still call himself handsome? "Yes, sir." The 2 immediately nodded their heads. Then, they asked curiously, "Sir, I didn't see you preparing anything for Her Majesty. I thought you would go empty-handed." "Naturally, I have already prepared it." Rinpoche waved his hand. "The 2 of you, go and change your clothes." When it was almost evening, Rinpoche brought Tai Dao and Tinghulu to the front gate of the palace. There were already a few carriages parked at the side of the plaza. In front of the palace gate, there were already a few rows of imperial bodyguards forming a human wall. There were 2 paths in the human wall. The officials of Dayo and the officials from the other 3 nations were separated when they entered. Chapter 117. Before Rinpoche arrived, there were already some people there. A few men dressed in red and purple ceremonial robes entered the palace without stopping. Some of the attendants recorded the gifts and waited outside the palace. Rinpoche listened to a few of them. When those attendants wrote down their gifts, they would read them out loud. For example, 13 warm sun grass, 1 heaven-grade weapon and so on. After waiting for a while, Rinpoche pondered for a while writing down his gifts. Not to mention the people from the other three nations, just the officials of the imperial court alone would probably send a lot of gifts. In addition to the gifts brought by the people from the other three nations, the number of gifts would probably be huge. It was impossible for the Empress to look through everyone's gifts. At most, she would choose the ones that she was interested in to look at. The rest would be directly sent to the imperial treasury. As such, how the gifts were written was very important. After all, if these things were not sent to the Empress, then they would not be able to curry favor with her. Other people's gifts could be more ordinary. After all, with their status, it didn't matter if their gifts were outstanding. As long as they weren't too shabby, it would be fine. However, Renbochin was different from all the other Dayo officials. After he reported his name, the surrounding people looked at Renbochin in astonishment. However, he was after all a secondary class, rank 6 official. Naturally, no one said anything. They just felt that he was being too arrogant. After writing down the gifts, someone would naturally send the items to the palace. As for the list of gifts, the Empress would look through it. Renbochin waved his hand at Tai Dao and Tinghulu, indicating that they could go back first. He then walked into the palace. There was a maid leading the way in front. Not far away, there were other people following the maid. Renbochin did not look around and obediently followed them to the front of an unfamiliar huge palace. At this moment, there were 2 rows of tables in the palace. What Renbochin liked was that there were 2 chairs behind each table. It was much more comfortable than kneeling in ancient costume dramas. There weren't many people inside. On the left side of the palace hall, there were several burly men with short hair or bald heads talking and laughing loudly. The voices were very messy. On the opposite side, a few people from the other 3 nations had arrived. They were all sitting at the tables with their eyes closed. Renbochin did not attract much attention when he entered. His seat was the outermost on the left side near the main door. After being led to his seat, he thanked the maid and sat in his seat in a daze. Next, he saw many big shots in the imperial court, but he didn't recognize any of them. The big shots of the imperial court who came later were mostly men with short hair or bald heads, and they all had strong bodies. The women, on the other hand, all looked very valiant. They were also dressed in formal attire, but it was more complicated than the men's. The female officials in Dayo weren't like those in ancient China, who were all in the palace. The proportion of female officials in the outer court of Dayo wasn't low. After all, the Empress was the strongest in Dayo, and the Aboriginal women weren't necessarily weaker than the men. However, Aboriginal women were mostly officials in the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Appointments. They were in charge of taxation and official assessments. Very few of them joined the army. Lu Ruoyao's mother was the imperial treasurer, in charge of money and grain. Not long after, Mr. Emptiness, Ning Kaichen, and the others also arrived. Ning Kaichen did not know where his spirit sword was. In any case, he came alone. It was the same for Mr. Emptiness. He did not bring any of the 4 beauties with him. What made Renbochin slightly surprised was that Ning Kaichen was actually sitting in the middle of the hall, slightly in front, while Mr. Emptiness was sitting in the middle and slightly behind. Both of them were only 7 or 8 seats apart. As time passed, the empty hall began to fill up, but the seats of honor on both sides were still empty. The people who came next were the real big shots, such as the second elder. There were 3 empty seats at the very front. Other than the second elder, there was still 1 more seat, but no one knew who it was. Next, the 7th Prince of Great Xia arrived. This time around, he was the guest of honor from the 3 nations. Naturally, he was seated in the seat of honor on the right side. After the 7th Prince came in, he immediately cast his gaze in Renbochin's direction and nodded at the person who had the same face as him. It wasn't only him. When he came in, the rest of the people also looked at him and Renbochin. After all, there were two people who looked exactly the same. One was the seventh prince of Great Xia, and the other was a secondary class, rank 6 official of Dayo. This kind of situation made many people feel that it was interesting. The moment Rinpoche saw the seventh prince, his heart surged with the same impulse he had previously. Furthermore, this feeling was even stronger than before. This made him squint his eyes slightly. After the seventh prince brought his people to the seat of honor on the right side and sat down, Rinpoche lowered his head slightly. His gaze was on the table, and he clenched his fists tightly for a while before releasing them. When an elder who was much thinner and weaker than the rest of the aboriginals entered the palace, and his posture wasn't as straight as before, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot. Following which, everyone stood up and greeted him. Even those arrogant big shots in the army lowered their voices when they saw him. This person was the great elder, Shurqing. It was because of him that there were so many people in the Shur family's stronghold who held office in the palace. For example, Shur Hu and Shur Wanshan. Shurqing was dressed in a deep red ceremonial robe. If it wasn't for the scar on his face, he would look like an old man on the street. Similarly, the junior elder, Shikohai, and Shurqing entered almost one after the other. After the two of them arrived, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot, and the rest of the people were more or less quiet. The two of them sat on the second and third seats on the left side. Only the seat of honor was still empty, and many people's gazes drifted to that seat from time to time. Even Rinpoche could roughly guess who that seat belonged to. Sure enough, a few minutes later, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man who gave off the impression of a towering mountain entered the palace. Everyone quietened down. Even the second elder didn't behave like this when he entered. Everyone stood up as a form of respect for the strong Sir Hongwu. Everyone greeted him. In particular, the voices of the big shots in the army were the loudest. On the right side, the people from the three nations also focused their attention on this man who could be said to be the most prestigious person in Dayo. Everyone was somewhat curious about Hongwu. After Hongwu sat down, the noises in the palace became much quieter. Everyone knew that the banquet was about to begin. At this moment, Rinpoche adjusted his mood and looked at the opposite side. There was a row of gigolos sitting in front of him. There were all kinds of them. There were the handsome boy type, the handsome man type, the playboy type, the melancholic and melancholy type. If this group of people were to be placed in the other nations, they might really attract the screams of many young girls who yearned for love and become a good couple. However, when he thought of the Empress's cold temperament and martial arts, Rinpoche felt that these people probably wouldn't stand a chance. After all, the Empress wasn't a 15 or 16-year-old girl who hadn't seen the world before. She couldn't be deceived with just her looks. It was useless even if one's eyes could electrify. Rinpoche looked at the peach blossom eyes opposite him and shuddered. Just as Rinpoche was sizing them up, grading, and letting his imagination run wild, a group of maids served the dishes. This time, the palace really quieted down. The kind of absolute silence. Everyone looked at the dishes in front of them and thought, what the hell is this? Chapter 118. The first dish was a plate of 8 freshwater fishes with their eyes wide open. Only the fish heads were exposed. The imperial kitchen even deliberately arranged the fish heads as if they were staring at you. The second dish was 4 eggs. Half of them were smashed, revealing the furry and matured birds inside. The third dish was a piece of brain that was emitting steam. It looked no different from human brains, except that it was slightly bigger. Then, some chopped green onions were sprinkled on it. Soon after, the palace hall started buzzing again. Everyone was whispering to each other. Was there something wrong with the dishes at this banquet? Following which, some people started to look at the entrance of the main hall. There was a person sitting there. Facing the murderous gazes of the crowd, Renbochin immediately felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. This was arranged by the Empress. Why are you looking at me? Isn't it just stargazing? Isn't it just duck eggs? Isn't it just steamed goat's brain? Isn't it just fried spiders? Renbochin looked at the few dishes in front of him, especially the steamed goat's brain that was emitting steam and the plate of fried spiders. He felt that he had lost his appetite. One of the remaining 2 dishes was a roasted vole. The other dish looked better, but if they knew what it was made of, it was estimated that no one would be willing to eat it. This group of people definitely didn't want to know what it was made of. If they knew, they would have the heart to strangle Renbochin. Being stared at by so many eyes, especially from the big shots in the imperial court, Renbochin felt uncomfortable all over. Which bastard sold me out? How did they know? He didn't think about it. After so many years of banquets, there had never been such problems. Yet, this happened not long after he arrived. Furthermore, he always went to the palace. It was easy for others to associate it with him. The 7th prince looked at the dishes in front of him and felt a little scared. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't look like something that could be eaten. Speaking of which, he was the dignified 7th prince. He had always lived a luxurious life. When had he ever seen such things? Not only him, but the others were also similar. Even though they didn't have a high status like him, they were all born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Even if they had suffered, it was just a little. They had never eaten such strange food before. Everyone looked up to see what was going on with the Dayo people. In the end, they saw that everyone was looking in the same direction. Looking at the gazes of the big shots in Dayo's imperial court, the people from the 3 nations frowned and felt nauseous. Then, they looked at him with all kinds of malicious gazes. Looking at those Dayo people, they would be fools if they didn't know that this was Renbochin's doing. From these dishes, they could feel the dense malice that assaulted their senses. They also recalled their old and new grudges. For a moment, Renbochin, who was sitting at the corner of the door, became the center of attention. But the biggest mastermind was the Empress. Without her approval, how could I arrange this? Renbochin felt that he definitely wouldn't be able to stick his head into his pants. He didn't have the guts to frown at the thousands of fingers pointing at him, so he decided to close his eyes and play dead. Even with his eyes closed, Renbochin still felt a chill on his body. Her Majesty has arrived. Renbochin was finally saved after hearing the voice at the door. The Empress was a little different today. She no longer had the lazy look that Renbochin had seen in the past. Her hair was tied up in a bun with a carved ruby hairpin. Her lips were as red as blood. Coupled with her cold temperament and her status, Renbochin was stunned the moment she entered. Her clothes today were also a little different. She usually wore red muslin, but tonight, she wore a red silk dress with golden embroidery patterns on her body. There was also a phoenix with its wings spread out on her back. Previously, Renbochin flattered the Empress by saying that she was the most beautiful in the world. After seeing the Empress today, Renbochin had no choice but to admit that he wasn't exaggerating. If 10 points were the full score, the Empress's appearance would be given 9 points, her temperament would be given another point, the 7th most powerful expert in the world would be given another point, and the ruler of a nation would be given another point. She would need at least 12 points. On the other hand, the group of gigolos stared blankly at the Empress, but they didn't dare to look at her for too long. They knew that the person in front of them could kill them with a single slap, but they still raised their heads to look at her. Then, they lowered their heads and raised their heads. Naturally, the seat of honor in the hall belonged to the Empress. After she sat down, the banquet officially began. When the Empress entered the hall, she swept a glance to the side. After seeing the food on everyone's table, she felt carefree and smiled. Who asked all of you to nag about marriage and having children every day? In fact, Renbochin was still wrong. If it wasn't for everyone taking turns to force her to get married during the court session a few days ago, the Empress wouldn't have asked him to prepare this menu. It was the people from the other 3 nations who were implicated by the many officials of Dayo. May Dayo always be brave and mighty. The Empress sat at the seat of honor and raised her cup. May your Majesty always be brave and mighty. Everyone raised their cups. Renbachian also followed suit. At this moment, no one was in the mood to care about him, and he finally heaved a sigh of relief. He downed the cup in one go. The alcohol was strong, and it went straight down his throat like a knife. His stomach was burning. At this moment, everyone should be eating to calm themselves down. However, everyone's eyes were on the Empress, and no one moved their chopsticks. A few people who couldn't hold their liquor lowered their heads and looked at the food on their plates. Then, they fiercely glared at Renbachian. The Empress raised her cup again and said, "May all of you be honored. May all of you be honored, Your Majesty." Everyone raised their cups. Once again, they downed the cup. After 2 rounds, some people couldn't take it anymore. Especially the row of gigolos opposite them. Although they were only attending the banquet and the 2 toasts had nothing to do with them, they still had to drink. At this moment, he lowered his head and swept his gaze across the table. After pondering for a long time, it seemed that only the braised pig intestines looked edible. When he placed it in his mouth with his eyes closed, the taste was unexpected. His mouth was filled with fragrance. This made everyone heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, that bastard didn't go too far. Many people looked at Renbachian again, wondering if he would eat it. If he didn't, they would beat him to death when they got out. The Empress was sitting at the seat of honor in the hall, but a group of people were looking at the door. Renbachian looked at everyone's gaze. "All right, I'll try it out with my own body. Otherwise, I'll really be out of luck when I get out." First, he tasted the braised pig intestines. It wasn't bad. The cooking skills of the Imperial Kitchen's chefs were pretty good. They should have been practicing recently. Following which, he grabbed a spider and put it in his mouth. He had never eaten this thing before. The colorful spider looked disgusting, but he braced himself and put it in his mouth. It's crispy and tastes like chicken. It tastes better than the braised pig intestines. Renbachian's eyes lit up. This thing was more delicious than he had expected. He grabbed another spider and put it in his mouth. For a moment, the entire hall was filled with him grabbing spiders left and right and putting them into his mouth. Chapter 119. Everyone watched as Ning Kaichen ate with relish. Doubtfully, he picked up the spider and sized it up. Grinning, he hesitated for a long time before closing his eyes and frowning. Like a bitter gourd, he placed the spider into his mouth. After chewing twice, he immediately opened his eyes and gave a thumbs up to Renbachian. The taste was indeed not bad. It was just too disgusting to look at. When the others saw what the 2 of them were doing, they thought to themselves, "It doesn't look bad. It's just too disgusting." The others also picked up the spiders and tasted them. Then, they nodded in agreement. The faces of the few gigolos twitched. After thinking about it, they decided to go back and eat the braised pig intestines. As for the other dishes, no one touched them. The Empress looked down at the crowd from her seat of honor, raised her cup again, and said, "This cup is for Dayo to exist forever. Dayo shall last forever." The row of people on the left continued to raise their glasses and drink. The people on the right were drinking silently, not saying a word. The Empress's next cup of wine was to thank everyone for coming all the way to Dayo to present their gifts. No matter what she thought, she still gave them some face. After all, she had sold most of the birthday gifts in the past few years in exchange for weapons. Long live the Empress of Dayo. The row of people on the right raised their glasses in unison. At this point, the Empress's opening was considered over, and everyone was more or less relaxed. Since someone was singing the ceremonial list in front of the hall, it was at least something to show off. General who supports the nation, Hongwu, is a jade fairy. The first one was Hongwu. After hearing this, Renbochin was still pondering what this jade embryo was. At the very least, it sounded high-end and grand. The others had already started to make a ruckus. The seventh prince, who was seated on the right, felt envious when he heard about the jade embryo. This was something that could only be found by chance. He had only heard of it but had never seen it before. The royal family of the Great Xia dynasty had been searching for it for so many years, but they had only found one. No one knew where Hongwu got one, but not only did he not hide it, he actually gave it to Qi Zixiao. It seemed that it was true that Hongwu and Qi Zixiao had a good relationship. After all, Hongwu definitely did not give this to Qi Zixiao. With his status, he did not need it. The immortal jade only had one use, but the emperor of the Grand Xia dynasty would be willing to exchange an entire city for it. It could extend one's lifespan by 20 years and maintain one's appearance at the time of consumption. Only when one's lifespan came to an end would one rapidly age. Longevity was the eternal pursuit of mankind. Maintaining appearance is the eternal pursuit of all women. These 2 points alone were enough to make everyone in the world go crazy. Hongwu took out a box from nowhere and placed it in front of the Empress. This item was too valuable, and he had to hand it over to the Empress personally. A warm feeling flowed through the Empress's heart. She knew that if it were someone else, they wouldn't take it out so easily. Without waiting for the others to receive it, the Empress immediately reached out to take it. She opened the box and revealed a round piece of jade. The Empress held the jade in her palm. Through the light, she could see an object that looked like a small person. "Thank you, Great General." The Empress nodded and placed the jade back into the box. Then, she placed the box beside her. This thing was also very valuable to her. She didn't care about 20 years of lifespan, but she was moved by the idea of eternal youth. After Hongwu returned to his seat, everyone stood up. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Apart from Hongwu, most of the other people's gifts were heaven-grade weapons, meteoric iron, rare treasures, and so on. Even though they were also very valuable, they paled in comparison to Hongwu's gift. Honglu Deputy, Storyteller Renbochin of Qingxin Palace Hall. The person who presented the gift paused for a while and continued, "Presenting a supreme mirror that is worthy of Your Majesty's possession." The palace was silent again. It was simply comparable to Hongwu's jade embryo. However, previously, everyone was shocked that Hongwu actually presented this treasure to Her Majesty. At this moment, everyone was thinking, "What the hell is this?" Their eyes swept across Renbochin, who was standing at the door. The Empress, who was originally in a good mood, was stunned when she heard this. Soon after, her eyes curved and she almost burst out laughing. "A supreme mirror that is worthy of Your Majesty's possession. What a strange name. I want to see if it really lives up to its name in a while." Following which, the people from the other 3 nations presented various gifts. The 7th prince's gift also surprised many people. 7 dragon scales and a drop of dragon blood. This gift was considered an extravagant one. Previously, when the 7th prince arrived, everyone was a little surprised. Why would a prince of Great Xia come to celebrate the Empress's birthday? They reckoned that he had other important matters to attend to. At this moment, the gift further confirmed everyone's conjecture. Only the Empress and the 7th prince knew that these 7 dragon scales were real dragon scales and that drop of dragon blood was dried up real dragon blood. Even though there was one word missing, the difference was like heaven and earth. That day, after the Empress flipped the table, the 7th prince pondered hard. Even though he didn't know what was so important about Renbaqian that Qi Zixia would directly flip the table, he still decided to take a gamble after a few days of consideration. Even if he was the seventh most powerful expert in the world, this gift was still very valuable, especially considering his status. He was betting that Qi Zixia would give him the thing he wanted. That bottle of blood was too important to him. It could save him at least 10 years of hard work. Even if this private transaction became public and the news of him giving such an important thing to the Dayo Empress would spread back to Great Xia, he didn't care. Once the Empress heard about this gift, she understood the seventh prince's intention. Since the other party had already done so, she would give him the Kirin blood. The next gift was more interesting. It was actually a painting of 100 beauties. It would be fine if it was given to a man, like a prince, but what was the meaning of giving it to the Empress? Most of the other gifts were jewels or paintings. Very few people were interested in them. There were only two that everyone was interested in. One was Renbaqian's, a supreme mirror worthy of your majesty. The other was Ning Caichen's, 100 beauties. Many people felt that there was definitely something strange about this, 100 beauties. The Empress seemed to understand everyone's thoughts and directly said, "Bring out the 100 beauties and Renbaqian's gifts. I think everyone would also like to see what they look like." The first to be brought out was the 100 beauties. It was a 1.2-meter wide painting scroll that was 10 meters long after it was unfolded. The figures on it were vivid and lifelike. Indeed, all of them were exceptionally talented. The people from the Yun Nation, Qin Nation, and Great Xia realized that the people on the painting were actually the most outstanding beauties in the world. Not only their looks, but their martial arts, background, and so on. The person who collected this 100 beauties was indeed a formidable person. At the very least, it would require resources to meet one of them. Furthermore, there was a person on the painting that everyone found somewhat familiar. Everyone's gaze fell on the seventh prince. One of the women was actually Xiao Wu, who was always by the seventh prince's side. Chapter 120. Great Xia's young master Ning, please talk about this painting. The Empress looked at it carefully and didn't see anything strange. The ladies in the painting were stunning. Could it be that Ning Caichen wanted to put them on par with her? What a joke! Ning Caichen stood up and cupped his hands at the Empress. Dayo's Empress, please forgive me for being impulsive. This painting was made by a strange person. His lifelong wish was to paint all the beauties in the world. However, he couldn't continue after painting 99 of them. Why? Someone beside him asked. Because out of these 99 beauties, there was one person who received a score of 5. However, he couldn't paint that person no matter how hard he tried. Therefore, when he knew that I was coming to Dayo, he entrusted this painting to me and presented it to the Empress to fulfill his wish. After that, Your Majesty can burn this painting. There are number 100 beauties in this world. One person is enough. How can others be compared to her? Ning Caichen cupped his hands and said. Everyone was dumbfounded by his words. Even Renbaqian was cursing in his heart. How can you suck up to such an extent? How are you going to survive after returning to Great Xia? Ning Caichen was a talent and a formidable enemy. If he had known earlier, he would have left him behind to feed the wolves. Needless to say, the rest of the people couldn't even take out the poems that they had prepared to praise the Empress. They couldn't take it out at all. With Ning Caichen's performance, whatever the rest of them said would be useless. However, the seventh prince frowned. 100 Xiao Wus couldn't even compare to one Qi Zixia. Qi Zixia received a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5. How could he feel about this? It was as if he was the only one who treated a commoner like a treasure. His mood immediately turned sour. Previously, the Empress was a little unhappy, but now, her face relaxed and the corners of her mouth curled up. Everyone could see that the Empress was in a good mood. Great Xia's young master Ning, I will accept this painting. The Empress nodded. Ning Kaichen cupped his hands and returned to his seat. Your Majesty naturally has a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5. A burly man touched his bald head and laughed. Not just 5 out of 5, but 6 out of 7 as well. I think that mutant's vision is still too shallow, another burly man immediately followed up. A group of burly men began to brag about the Empress. However, these words were only effective if the first person said it. The Empress said, bring out Rinpoche's gift. I think everyone is curious, and I'm also extremely curious. After the Empress opened her mouth, everyone nodded their heads in succession. They were indeed curious about what exactly was the half-body supreme mirror that Her Majesty was talking about. The name was strange, but the tone was also very big. Next, 2 people carried a box to the center of the hall. The outer packaging wasn't very exquisite. In fact, it was very rough. It was an outer box made of wood. Through the cracks, one could see what was inside, but they couldn't tell what it was. Rinpoche, you can take out your gift for everyone to see, the Empress said. Rinpoche stood up and walked to the center of the hall. Fortunately, he was prepared. Even though Ning Caichen's bootlicking was excellent, Rinpoche was not inferior to Ning Caichen's and could be considered the best bootlicking ever. May I trouble any sirs to open this box? Don't damage the item inside, Rinpoche cupped his hands and said to the row of people on the left. Everyone looked at each other. If it was a more troublesome item, they would be a little interested. However, they were too lazy to touch this wooden box. Let me do it. In the end, a burly man at the end of the row stood up and walked to the front of the hall. He first bowed to the Empress, then gently pinched the wooden box with his fingers and broke it. He pinched it from the top to the bottom, then pulled it apart with both hands. The entire wooden box fell to pieces. Rinpoche held on to the half-body mirror that was wrapped in craft paper and nodded to that burly man to express his gratitude. Thank you very much, sirs. Following which, he tore the craft paper and revealed a shiny silver mirror. The frame was made of European metal and was extremely complicated to make. Just the pattern and craftsmanship alone would require a lot of effort for a blacksmith to make it. What was even more attractive was the surface of the mirror. It was different from the somewhat blurry and dim copper mirrors that were currently used. This mirror reflected the outside world without any blur and everything was extremely clear. The inside of the mirror was truly like another whole. Everything down to the finest detail could be seen. After seeing this mirror, there wasn't a single woman in the hall who wasn't tempted. There were also 10 words on the left and right sides of this mirror. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Someone read out the words one by one. Everyone was shocked. Rinpoche cupped his hands toward the Empress and said, there is only one such mirror in this world. I believe that only Her Majesty is qualified to possess it. Just like the words on the mirror, if heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. It had to be said that Rinpoche's bootlicking was too effective. Just now, Ning Caichen's 100 beauties had already amazed everyone. At this moment, when Rinpoche took out the mirror, everyone was shocked. The mirror was a rare treasure, but the words on it were the most important. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Before heaven let Her Majesty be born, the ages would be like a long night. These words were too imposing. Everyone could feel the imposing manner from these words. Previously, Ning Kaichen said that Her Majesty took up 50% of all the women in the world. The other 99 exceptional beauties took up 40%, and the rest of the women only took up 1%. Only when all the women in the world were added up could they compete with Her Majesty. This was already an extremely exaggerated praise, and Ning Kaichen would probably have some trouble in the future. However, this was still comparing Her Majesty to other women. When it came to Rinpochen, it went one step further. Since ancient times, this mirror included all the outstanding geniuses, all the heroes who dominated the world, and all the emperors who ruled the world. Before Her Majesty appeared in this world, even with all of you, this world was still in the dark night. After Her Majesty was born, this world was truly glorious. Compared to Her Majesty, all of you are but the light of a firefly. Just now, they could still respond to Ning Saichen's words, but now, they didn't dare to respond to Rinpochien's words. These words were too arrogant. He truly regarded the heroes of the world as nothing and the countless heroes of the past thousands of years as nothing. Even in their own homes, no one dared to say these words, let alone on such an occasion. After recovering from the shock, the people from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation glared at Rinpochen. Wasn't this flattery too much? Everyone felt that Rinpochien's bootlicking had gone too far this time. Qi Zixiao might not dare to respond to these words. Putting everything else aside, in terms of strength, she was only the 7th most powerful expert in the world and not the number 1 expert in the world. If she were to respond to these words, what would the other 6 people think of her? What would the Emperor of Great Xia think of her? Did she really think that there was no one else in this world? For a moment, the hall quietened down again. No one spoke as they waited to see how this would end. Chapter 121. Storyteller Ren, the mirror is excellent. Just pretend that you didn't hear any nonsense. You may leave now. The old man sitting in the 3rd seat said. Junior Elder Zhikohai was the highest-ranking person in Dao besides Qi Zixiao, Hong Wu, and Shi Qing. With these words, the matter was settled. He reprimanded Rinpochen as nonsense and chased him out. That was the end of the matter. It seemed like the junior elder had helped the emperor out of his predicament. However, many people were frowning as well. Since he had already spoken, those with lower statuses couldn't say anything before Her Majesty spoke. Rinpochen was surprisingly calm. Looking at everyone's reaction, he would be a fool if he didn't know what the problem was. In fact, he had already thought about this problem. However, based on the Empress's behavior, he decided to use this line. Perhaps everyone thinks that I'm being arrogant, but that's how I feel. If Her Majesty wants me to speak, it should be Her Majesty. Rinpochen cupped his hands and didn't say anything else. He naturally knew who he should listen to and who he shouldn't. However, he felt that there was still a chance to turn the situation around. He had some understanding of the Empress over the past few days. Her thoughts were probably different from these people. Do you think that I'm being arrogant? Just as Rinpochen finished speaking, the Empress suddenly spoke with a cold voice. When the Empress said this, everyone in Dao quivered. Was Her Majesty going to flip out? Some people really thought so. However, if they said yes, it would mean that they felt that the Empress wasn't worthy. That would be courting death. Especially when the Empress looked like she was going to flip out. In particular, how could the people from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation say anything? They were just waiting to see how this show would turn out. Rinpochen turned his head and saw the Empress. Her face was calm as usual, and he couldn't tell what she was thinking. Your Majesty. A burly man was about to stand up and speak, but he was interrupted by a sudden burst of laughter. I think these words are good. They are indeed worthy of Her Majesty. If anyone has any objections, you can ask me first. Hong Wu suddenly slapped the table and laughed. He didn't say that the Empress was worthy of these words, but he said that they were worthy of her. He unscrupulously slapped the table and laughed heartily, his voice unbridled. He was number 9 in the world. He had the guts and the spirit to say such words. If he didn't even dare to say these words, then he wouldn't be worthy of being the 9th in the world. However, the others were different from him. No matter how reckless they were, their strength was not at their level, and their breadth of mind was not at their level. This was the difference between Hongwu and the others. Hongwu's gaze swept across the faces of everyone on the right, but no one spoke. That's right. If anyone has any objections, show me your blade. The burly man who wanted to get up just now said. Even though they were all aboriginals, there was still a difference of opinion between the military and civil officials. Shikohai frowned as he stood up and cupped his fists. I have something to say. Shikohai. How dare you? The hairpin on the Empress's head exploded, and all her hair fluttered behind her. His Majesty is really angry. Everyone thought to themselves when they saw the situation. A terrifying aura enveloped the entire hall. The aura was so thick and terrifying that it shocked everyone. It wasn't that His Majesty hadn't flipped out in the past, but the aura was never this terrifying. Many people were pressed down on their chairs by this aura and couldn't move at all. If there were people who weren't affected, it would be Renbochin. It was as if there was a typhoon around him, and he didn't feel anything at all. The other person was Hongwu, who wasn't affected at all. The other Dao officials felt as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on their heads, and they could be smashed to pieces at any time. Even though they knew that the Empress definitely wouldn't do that, this terrifying aura still frightened them. The Empress stared at Shikohai with a cold expression, but everyone felt that she was like a volcano that was about to erupt. When I first inherited the throne, you were the one who jumped up and down the most. Later on, when I stabilized my position, you also calmed down, and I kept you around. However, you spoke up before I even said anything. You even dared to chase my people out of this banquet. You are too presumptuous. Others might not know what you are thinking, but do you think I don't? Do you have any objections to these words? The Empress asked coldly. How dare you chase my people out? What are you trying to say? Sweat trickled down Shikohai's forehead like water. He didn't expect the Empress to have such a big reaction. The Empress's terrifying aura suppressed him to the point that he couldn't get up. He was also shocked. From the aura, he could tell that the person above him was even more powerful. However, he didn't know exactly how powerful she was because he couldn't sense it. Your Majesty, I have something to say, Shikohai gritted his teeth and said. Speak. The Empress's cold voice seemed to explode in everyone's ears. I'm confused. I was wrong just now, Shikohai gritted his teeth and said. At this moment, he had no choice but to lower his head. The aura of the person above him was too terrifying, and he couldn't move at all. Furthermore, he had a feeling that if he said anything more, he might not be able to leave the palace. After Shikohai admitted his mistake, the Empress snorted and slowly withdrew her aura. The people from the 3 nations looked at the Empress with uneasy gazes. Was this the strength of the 7th most powerful expert in the world? Just her aura alone made them unable to move, as if they were nailed to their chairs. It was really terrifying. Even though they knew that this person was very terrifying, they had never experienced it personally, so they had some other thoughts. In particular, the Empress's age and appearance made them think even more. However, at this moment, no one dared to have any other thoughts. The lips of a few weak gigolos had turned pale. On the other hand, many people in Dao were thinking, Your Majesty's strength has become even more terrifying. The Empress glanced at the people below and said, I like these words very much, so I'll keep them. If anyone has any objections, let him or her look for me. Her usual lazy and indifferent voice was swept away. It was filled with coldness and a domineering aura. I'll treat all of you as nothing. If anyone has any objections, come and fight me. Following which, the Empress looked at Renbochin, who was standing alone in the hall with a smile on his face, and remained silent. Everyone didn't know what the Empress was looking at or thinking about at this moment. They all looked at Renbachien and wanted to see something from him. Renbachien stood alone in the hall while being surrounded by more than 200 people. Besides the big shots in the imperial court, they were all descendants of aristocratic families from other nations. When had he ever received such treatment? His whole body began to stiffen. He asked in his heart 100 times, what exactly is the situation now? For a full 10 minutes, the atmosphere in the hall remained in this state. At this moment, the Empress opened her mouth. Her voice wasn't as cold as before, but had a different meaning. Renbachien, I like you very much. I hereby issue an imperial edict to summon you into the palace and make you the Empress. After the Empress said this, other than Renbachien, who still had a blank look on his face, everyone else stood up from their chairs in shock. Even Hongwu was dumbfounded. Chapter 122. Her Majesty was the Empress. If she was looking for a son-in-law, the other party would have the title of a prince. That was why the Empress said, "You shall enter the palace and become the king." Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. The entire hall exploded in an instant and immediately turned into a wet market. Seeing the reactions of these people and thinking about what the Empress just said, Renbachien had an incredible thought. It can't be. What's going on? Not only was Renbachien's body stiff, but his entire body was like a block of wood. Enter the palace and become the king. If he guessed correctly, he was going to marry the Empress. Otherwise, why would those people have such a big reaction? But how could this be possible? This was the 7th most powerful person in the world, the Empress of Dao. Why would she suddenly make such a decision? Am I crazy or is she crazy? Now, the entire hall was in a mess. Everyone stood up from their seats and begged the Empress to reconsider. On the right, the descendants of the aristocratic families from the 3 nations and the 7th prince were also dumbfounded. Qi Zixiao chose this secondary class, rank 6 official from nowhere as her husband. Why? Everyone was thinking the same thing, why? Some people even pinched their own thighs. Was this a dream? Everyone was at a loss. Mr. Emptiness coughed violently for a while and looked at Renbachien with a smile on his face. He came here for other matters and had never thought of becoming the Empress's husband. Therefore, when he saw the scene in the hall, he felt that it was interesting. Ning Kaichen had a strange expression on his face. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have spent so much effort to curry favor with Qi Zixiao. He might as well curry favor with this new prince. Fortunately, he had gone through thick and thin with Qi Zixiao on the mountain, right? Even Green Bead was shot down by Qi Zixiao with an arrow. This could be considered as giving him some face. Thinking of Green Bead, he felt his heart ache again. The 7th prince sat there with lifeless eyes. It was as if he had received a huge shock. How did this guy, who looked exactly like him, get Qi Zixiao's favor? The Empress looked at the group of people below and inexplicably felt very happy. She stood up and said, "Let's end the banquet here. The rest of you can go back. As for what you want to say, follow me to the throne room." As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and left the hall. Everyone in Dao's imperial court hurriedly followed him. Hongwu walked past Renbachien and placed his hand on Renbachien's shoulder. He furrowed his eyebrows and left without saying a word. Renbachien was left standing in the field, not knowing what to do. No one seemed to have asked for his opinion. Should he follow them or stay here? Congratulations, Imperial Prince Ren. I will visit you again another day. Ning Kaichen was the first to step forward. With a smile on his face, he patted Renbochen's shoulder and staggered out of the door. Prince Ren, cough cough, congratulations. Mr. Emptiness followed closely behind. No matter what the others were thinking, they had to come up and congratulate him. However, these people were not as carefree as Ning Kaichin and Mr. Emptiness. After all, this wasn't their goal. As for the rest of the people, they couldn't say that Renbochen, who was merely a secondary class, rank 6 martial artist, actually became Qi Zixiao's husband in the blink of an eye. No matter how they thought about it, they couldn't accept it either. There were so many people who were much stronger than him. Why did it have to be him? The impression that Renbochen gave them, other than being a fox exploiting the tiger's might at the Honglu Bureau, was his flattery tonight. However, how could he become the husband of the 7th most powerful expert in the world and the Empress of Dayo, Qi Zixiao? They couldn't accept it. They couldn't accept it. They couldn't accept it. These 3 words were practically written on their faces. However, they still squeezed out a smile from their wrinkled faces, congratulated him, and quickly walked out of the palace. The 2 people from the Zhang family were also among them. After leaving the palace, they became despondent. Zhang Heji asked, "Why?" Zhang Heju asked, "Why?" All the way back to the relay station of the Honglu Bureau, the 2 of them were still mumbling, "Why?" Zhang Junzheng looked at his 2 nephews and shook his head slightly. He knew why they were like this. Not only the 2 of them, but the rest of the people also had the same mentality. Seeing a person who was far inferior to them receiving the favor of Qi Zixiao and even becoming her husband, everyone felt unbalanced. However, he was thinking about another matter. Now that Dayo's Qi Zixiao had actually chosen such a person to become her husband, would there be any changes in Dayo's imperial court? One had to know that this person wasn't an aboriginal. If he wanted to obtain support from the aboriginals, it would be difficult for him to do so. In that case, what would he do? When everyone was halfway out, Renbochen was surrounded by a few guards. Just now, the incident happened too suddenly, and no one could react in time. No matter what, they had to protect Renbochen first. Otherwise, if Renbochen suddenly met a lunatic in this hall and something happened to him, they wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. However, none of the officials mentioned this matter just now, so it wasn't as if they didn't have such thoughts. Storyteller Ren, I will bring some people to escort you back to the Beast Park to retrieve your things and move them into the palace. A moment later, Xianzhe appeared in front of Renbochen. She scanned him over and over again, trying to figure out why the Empress would make such a decision. Storyteller Ren. Seeing that he was still standing there in a daze, Xianzhe called him again and repeated what she said. This time, Renbochen came back to his senses. When he heard what Xianzhe said, he couldn't help but ask, is there a need to be so fast? The Empress has just said what she said, and the other side hasn't finished discussing it yet she wants me to move into the palace? Furthermore, even if the discussion is over, shouldn't I move into the palace directly? No matter what, it should be after the wedding, right? At this moment, he didn't know what to say. He was really panicking. The husband of the Empress, the strongest expert in Dayo, the 7th most powerful expert in the world, and also the husband of a peerless beauty. It sounded wonderful. However, this matter wouldn't be so simple no matter how he thought about it. Who was Qi Zixiao? The 7th most powerful expert in the world, an existence that could tear down a city wall with one hand. What about him? He couldn't do anything. Other than knowing some things that the people of this world didn't know, what else did he have? Just like how an elephant would take a fancy to an ant. Would the Empress take a fancy to him? No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible. Looking at it from another perspective, even if the Empress really took a fancy to him, would he dare to stay by her side? Perhaps when she wasn't paying attention, his bones and flesh would turn into mush. The difference in strength was really too big. Renbochin also knew that it was useless for him to panic now. He hoped that those big shots over there would quickly persuade the Empress to rescind her order. He would definitely be deeply grateful and offer memorial tablets to them. Even Jakohai, who he previously felt was a scoundrel, now felt that he was really a good person. If he had known that things would turn out like this, he would have kept a lower profile. Originally, he wanted to send a red packet to the eunuch of the fire beacon whom he liked a lot after returning to Earth. Now, he wanted to go back and fight it out with him. That sentence was indeed very good, and his bootlicking should have been very good as well. However, he didn't expect the Empress to not play her cards according to common sense. Back at the Beast Park, caretaker Sher saw Renbochin being escorted back by a few guards. One of them was even a Prince Guard commander. He hurriedly went forward and saw Renbochin's deeply worried face. Immediately, he asked Xianzhe in a low voice, "Madam, did storyteller Ren commit a crime?" "No, pack up his things and bring them to the palace," Xianzhe said straightforwardly. Renbochin's house was filled with all kinds of miscellaneous things. A sleeping bag, a pistol, a grenade, a bedsheet from Earth, an e-book, a camera, a small bag of sweets, and a short knife that someone gave him. Renbochin watched as everyone packed up his things. Then, he turned to caretaker Sher with a sullen face and said, "Help me take care of these two little fellows. Also, make sure they don't slack off on the 2 plots of land." At this moment, he felt that he was like a commoner who was being robbed. P.S. Thank you to Long Outyen, Love Food for Thought, and the 7th Generation Madman for your tips. Chapter 123. The Empress sat in the throne room, looked around at the crowd, and said, "If you have anything to say, say it now." "Your Majesty, although you want to have an heir, this person can't do it," a burly man standing in the throne room said. "Your Majesty, this person's origin is unknown, and he's too weak." "I also feel that he can't do it." "Your Majesty, please choose again. After all, this is related to having an heir." "Your Majesty, the Aboriginals have thousands of good men. Why don't you choose from among us?" "Your Majesty, this person is definitely not worthy of you." The Empress sat in the throne room, propped her chin with the back of her hand, and looked at the noisy crowd below. She was rather happy. After waiting for a while, she sat up straight and said coldly, "Why? Do I need your approval to choose someone?" As soon as she said this, the crowd immediately became much quieter. However, they still said, "Your Majesty, please reconsider. If I choose a son-in-law, so what if he's strong or weak? Which man in this world can compare to me? Can you kidnap the other 5 people besides Li Yuanzhu?" The Empress said coldly. "Moreover, it's hard to say whether they can beat me. Even if they aren't strong, they definitely can't be too weak." "This person is frail and can never have an heir with you," someone said. "Our imperial treasury can't push someone to the Earth will level." "What a joke." The Empress sneered. This. Everyone was speechless. If the Empress wanted to, she could definitely push a fool to the Earth will level in a short period of time. Although an Earth will expert wasn't considered strong, it was possible for him to have an heir. But this person's origin is unknown. Someone tried to say. "So what if his origin is unknown? What are you afraid of?" The Empress asked. What was there to be afraid of? Everyone was just trying to find a reason to make the Empress retract her order. Even if he was an Earth will expert, the Empress could kill him with a wave of her hand. What was there to be afraid of? However, after the Empress said this, they couldn't possibly say, "I just want you to change to another one, right? You have to find a reason, right? He looks exactly like the 7th Prince of Great Xia. It's hard to believe that he isn't related." Your Majesty should be more cautious. If he's really a member of the royal family of Great Xia and Her Majesty chooses him as a son-in-law, I'm afraid it'll be detrimental to Deo, someone else advised. The royal family of Great Xia doesn't have the ability to do so. Naturally, I can prove that he has nothing to do with Great Xia. The Empress waved her hand. The royal family of Great Xia couldn't allow a person to suddenly appear and disappear. Also, his messy things and words weren't from Great Xia. Everyone objected for a long time, but in the end, they were unable to sway the Empress. Seeing this, Hongwu took a step forward and said, Your Majesty, I don't have to object, but I wonder what you see in him. The Empress stretched out her fair fingers and gently stroked her chin. I don't hate it. This was the Empress's answer. At the end of the day, it could be summed up in 3 words, I don't hate it. The Empress was very clear that she had to find someone to give birth to an heir. However, how many men in the world were worthy of her? Others only knew that she was number 7 in the world, but now that she was ranked again, it was hard to say how many people were in front of her. Even if there were, those few would be over 50 years old. Since she became her current position at the age of 16, other than the court officials and imperial guards, how many people had she interacted with? Needless to say, the aboriginals kept quiet out of fear when they saw her. As for the foreigners that she saw during the birthday celebrations every year, it was hard for her to be interested. Even though Rinpoche was weak, at least he made her feel that he was interesting. He could cry miserably, talk, and perform a bunch of tricks. Not to mention, he was pretty fun. To her, who was already at the top, strength and status weren't important. In any case, he wasn't as good as her and wasn't worthy of her attention. In her eyes, he wasn't even as good as pretty fun. And those candies, she liked them very much. That mirror, she liked them very much. That sentence, she liked them very much. When a person did a few things that she liked, she would have a good impression of him. It would also save others from bothering her. Hongwu looked at the Empress with an indescribable complex feeling. He really didn't want Her Majesty to choose that fellow, just like how no father would want his daughter to marry a wretch. With his strength and status, how could he possibly like Rinpoche? However, for the past few years, the Empress hadn't been interested in him at all. Just as Hongwu was worrying about this, the Empress unexpectedly chose him and gave the reason, I don't hate him. Your Majesty, in my opinion, why don't you arrange a position for him first? When he reaches the earth will level, if you think it's okay, you can appoint him as a prince, Hongwu said after a moment of silence. Sir Hongwu. Everyone was shocked as they didn't expect him to say this. I also agree with General-in-Chief who supports the nation, Shurqing, who had been silent for the whole night, stepped forward and said. Then it's decided. Disperse. The Empress immediately made the decision. Since Hongwu and Shurqing had said so and the Empress had already made the decision, the others had no choice but to pinch their noses and accept it. After the crowd dispersed, the court officials surrounded Hongwu and Shurqing as soon as they left the palace. Sir, is Her Majesty really going to choose that fellow as her son-in-law? Hongwu stopped in his tracks, looked back at the palace gates that were still open, and asked, what's the point of objecting? We naturally know that it's difficult to change Her Majesty's mind, but this matter is really too important. We still hope that Her Majesty will reconsider, someone immediately said. Hongwu shook his head slightly. Such an objection would definitely not end well. Her Majesty was no longer the girl from before. It wasn't that the others didn't know Her Majesty's temperament, but they didn't know how to persuade her other than objecting. If he wants to reach the earth will level, even with Her Majesty's help, it will take at least 2 to 3 years. Too many things can happen in 2 to 3 years, Hongwu said, then ignored the crowd and left. Shurqing's words were similar to Hongwu's, 2 to 3 years is enough for Her Majesty to seriously consider this matter. If Her Majesty still made the same decision at that time, then it shall be him. Seeing that the two big shots had said so, the others also understood what they meant. Since they couldn't change Her Majesty's mind, then they would leave it at that. Too many things could happen in these 2 to 3 years. Maybe Her Majesty would hate him and kill him with a slap. Maybe he would fall sick and die. Who could say? If Her Majesty didn't change her mind at that time when he reached the earth will level, then everyone could only accept it. In any case, wouldn't Her Majesty's bloodline be preserved? Thinking about it this way, it seemed to be a little better than having the Empress be uninterested after being urged by everyone year after year. Chapter 124. Renbochin looked at the room he was in and was speechless. Was he being robbed? Why didn't anyone ask for his opinion? Even though he didn't dare to say no. How was he going to clean up this mess? Escape? That was impossible. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to escape. He was unfamiliar with this place. Even if he left the palace, where could he run to? He wouldn't even know his way out of Lawn City. If he were to escape like this, he would probably be caught within a day. Renbochin didn't know how long he was in a daze. He heard footsteps and the door was pushed open. The Empress stood at the door and looked at him. Then, she sat down at the table in the room. Your Majesty. Renbochin quickly got up. The Empress nodded her head slightly. Then, the room fell into a short silence. Renbochin had a lot to say, but he didn't dare to say a word. What do you want to say? The Empress suddenly asked. Renbochin was slightly stunned. He didn't expect the Empress to ask him this question. As I said before, if the heavens didn't give birth to Your Majesty, it would be like an eternal night. Your Majesty's grace is unparalleled. I'm extremely grateful to be loved by someone like Your Majesty. I'm willing to go through fire and water for Your Majesty. It's just that I'm also afraid. I can't do anything for Deo and I'm like a firefly in front of the blazing sun. How can I be worthy of Your Majesty's love? Renbochin thought it over and over again and decided to offer some flattery first before saying anything else. If he could, he wanted to belittle himself as a bug in a smelly ditch. The Empress looked at him, nodded her head and said, You don't look so annoying and I like to listen to your words. It's you then. Renbochin was speechless. Did he flatter her too much? Since you know that you're weak, follow me to the second level of Qingxin Palace Hall tomorrow to choose a martial arts manual. You must reach Earth level. If I'm not satisfied with your progress, you know the consequences. The Empress looked at him and said. Yes, Your Majesty. Renbochin didn't know whether he should be happy or sad. Originally, he wanted to look for Du Chongkong to exchange martial arts manuals. In the end, his plan couldn't keep up with the changes. Now, there was no need for it. He could just go to Qingxin Palace Hall to get it. The martial arts manuals there were definitely better than Du Chongkong's. If you feel like you haven't done anything, then show me what you know. I have something to ask you. Do you know how to forge weapons to equip our Aboriginal warriors? Renbochin hesitated for a moment. Right now, he had two choices. The first was to conceal his strength, but there were no benefits. There were a lot of disadvantages. For example, in the eyes of others, he only knew how to flatter others and was not favored by others. If his cultivation progress did not reach the standard in the future, his treatment would also be worrying. Before he was brought in, he would have been extremely unwilling to do so. However, if he were to be chased out after being brought in, his fate would probably be even more miserable. Since that was the case, he could only choose the second option. He had to do everything well so that he could stand firm. As for the rest, it would depend on his cultivation progress. He immediately raised his head and said to the Empress, "I wonder if there are any iron mines in Deo. If we don't have iron ore, it's useless even if we have a method. There are 2 of them, but their output is limited. Many people are injured every year. Furthermore, it's very difficult to refine the iron ores that are pulled back." The Empress was very pleased to see that he really had a solution. "I have a method to refine iron ores. As for whether the output can be increased, I'm afraid I will only know after seeing it in person," Renbochin continued. The Empress nodded her head slightly. If Renbochin had a method, at least the shortage of weapons would be reduced. After which, she threw a token to Renbochin and said, "With this token, you can go anywhere in the palace except for the treasury, arsenal, and a few other places. Tomorrow, you will follow me to Qingshin Palace Hall." After she finished speaking, she immediately left the house. After the Empress left, Renbochin collapsed on the bed. Until now, he still felt as if he was in a dream. After a long while, he got up and opened up the things that were placed beside him. Inside were all the things that he brought back from Earth. At this moment, Renbochin suddenly remembered something. He was going back to Earth tonight. How was he going to follow the Empress to Qingshin Palace Hall tomorrow? He was afraid that the Empress would send someone to discover that he was missing tomorrow. She wouldn't think that he had run away, right? Renbochin used all his strength to hit himself. Just now, his mind was in a mess and he had forgotten about this matter. What should he do now? Even though the Empress was well aware that he had disappeared once every 3 days, it was different this time. In the past, the Empress was far away from him. She had the heart of an empress and turned a blind eye to it. Now that he had disappeared on the first night of entering the palace, it was hard to say what the Empress would think. What should he do? Should he look for the Empress now? Renbochin walked around the house a few times and rummaged through his pile of things. Finally, he took out his camera and pondered whether he should send her a gift again. After thinking about it, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get away with his current situation. It was better to be honest with the Empress. After all, he was in the palace now and it was only a matter of time before she found out. As for the rest, it was better than worrying about it over and over again. Renbochin placed the camera back in its original position. With the mentality of throwing caution to the wind, he opened the door and strode out. Outside the room was a garden that was at least 300 to 400 square meters. There was also a small stream flowing through the courtyard. Unknown insects were flapping their wings and chirping in the night. Renbochin strode to the entrance of the courtyard and saw an imperial guard standing at the door. Storyteller Ren. That imperial guard turned his head and saw him. He hesitated for a moment and didn't know how to address him. However, this was Renbochin's current position. "I have an important matter to discuss with Her Majesty," Renbochin cupped his fists and said. "Storyteller Ren, follow me." That imperial guard nodded and said. After taking a few steps, Renbochin suddenly thought of something. He could see the Empress whenever he wanted to. Impossible, right? He was afraid that the Empress had instructed him in advance. He might have forgotten about that matter, but the Empress probably didn't. Was she waiting for him to confess to her? Thinking of this, Renbochin felt a chill at the back of his neck. The Empress returned to the palace. That mirror was standing not far from her bed. She walked to the front of the mirror and could see the reflection of the object in the distance. It was clearly visible and there wasn't a trace of unnaturalness. It was much better than the bronze mirror. The Empress came to the front of the mirror and quietly sized up the woman in it. After a while, she looked at the words on both sides of the mirror and reached out to touch it. It was smooth. The words were engraved on the back of the mirror. After a long time, the Empress retracted her gaze, turned around, and reclined on the bed. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were at the side, quickly served fruits and wine. "Do you have something to say?" The Empress looked up and seemed to have something to say. She opened her mouth and said, I have always treated you well. If you have something to say, just say it. Hong Wuan placed the fruits at the side, walked to the Empress's back and massaged her shoulders. She swallowed the words that were at the tip of her tongue and said, Your Majesty, you have a candidate. Both of us are naturally happy for you. The 9th update, thank you Hehe.233, Diver Lu, for reading the book, Fell, continue to update. Also, thank you Eli. I will add more updates when I have enough rewards. I will continue to write my story. Chapter 125. He had run out of manuscripts, but he was working hard to finish them. He should be able to finish 2 chapters today. Chapter 126. Your Majesty, Storyteller Ren is here. A palace guard entered the hall to report. Let him in. The Empress waved her hand. A moment later, Ren Bachin entered the hall and greeted, Greetings, Your Majesty. At this moment, the Empress was still wearing the same clothes. After seeing Ren Bachin, she passed the wine cup to Qing Yuan and waved at Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan. Both of them immediately bowed to the Empress and retreated. When they passed by Ren Bachin, they didn't forget to size him up. Tonight's incident was a surprise to everyone, including the 2 of them. It's so late, what's the matter? The Empress asked. Your Majesty, I have something to say to you. Ren Bachin was already here, so he naturally couldn't shrink back. Furthermore, he could hide today, but he couldn't hide tomorrow. Since it was going to be like this sooner or later, he had to express his sincerity. Speak. The Empress sat up from the couch, shifted her body backward, and leaned against the back of the couch. Come closer and speak. Ren Bachin took a few steps forward and stopped 2 meters away from the couch. Then, he said, I'm from China. I've heard you mention it before. The Empress nodded her head. China isn't in this world. I don't know how far China is from here. Perhaps it's separated by an entire galaxy or even a different universe, Ren Bachin said. I thought this was the only world in this world. Is there a world outside of the galaxy? Isn't that the place where the gods lived in? The Empress asked. I don't know about other things, but Earth is definitely not the place where the gods lived. Ren Bachin shook his head. Is Earth the place where you live? Continue speaking. I have to return to Earth once every 3 days and return after 1 day. I'm afraid Your Majesty already knows about this, and I don't want to hide it from you. This kind of return trip is beyond my control, and I have no choice, Ren Bachin said. So you can't stay here. The Empress's voice didn't change much, but Ren Bachin felt the surroundings suddenly turn cold. Ren Bachin felt a chill down his spine, but he forced himself to remain calm and said, Your Majesty, you're wrong. Ren Bachin mobilized all his brain power, and without waiting for the Empress to speak, he directly said, I never knew why I had the opportunity to come here. But these days, I suddenly realized that there was a reason why I came to this world. I came for His Majesty. Otherwise, why would I appear in front of Your Majesty's carriage instead of somewhere else? It was meant to be. Just as Your Majesty is destined to be the king of this world, I am destined to come here to accompany Your Majesty. This was arranged by the heavens, and the heavens were the most powerful. Since the heavens have arranged for me to be by Your Majesty's side, I will never leave. Tell me the truth, the Empress said as she looked at Ren Bachin carefully. Every word I said is true and comes from the bottom of my heart. If God has arranged for me to stay by Your Majesty's side for a period of time, I hope it will be 10,000 years. After Ren Bachin finished speaking, he could clearly feel the Empress withdrawing her aura. If I find out that you lied to me, you know the consequences, the Empress said. Her pair of phoenix eyes were filled with an indescribable look. Even though she was the Empress, she had never heard such words before. Her gaze toward Renbochin became gentler and gentler. It's just that I really can't control my movements, so I'll have to go back tonight. However, I feel that it's also a good thing to go back. I can help your Majesty find something worthy of your Majesty. Pour me some wine, the Empress said. Renbochin nimbly filled the wine cup beside him and passed it to the Empress. After seeing that she had finished drinking, he filled another cup for her. Remember your words, the Empress said again. How can I not remember? Even if I lose my life, I will still look up to your Majesty from the netherworld, Renbochin said. Drink this cup of wine. The Empress immediately handed the wine cup over. Renbochin looked at the wine cup in the Empress's hand and thought that this was an indirect kiss, right? However, his hands didn't slow down. After receiving the wine cup, he drank it in one gulp. He felt that there seemed to be a fragrant aroma in the wine. I will remember your words. Go back and look for me the day after tomorrow, the Empress said. I will take my leave. Renbochin placed the wine cup at the side, bowed to the Empress, and left. When he walked out of the door, he saw Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan standing not far away. Greetings to the two ladies. Renbochin cupped his hands toward them. Greetings to storyteller Ren. Both of them bowed as well. Today, Renbochin was no longer just a storyteller. Even if their attitude toward him wasn't like how they treated the Empress, it was still much better than before. Renbochin found the Imperial Guard outside and asked him to bring him back to his previous room. After closing the door, Renbochin went back to his bed and thought about the Empress's every move just now. He remembered the change in the Empress's attitude. So far, it seemed that he had done a good job. He wasn't too sure about other things, but Renbochin could see that the Empress liked to listen to flattering words. This was normal. Since ancient times, who hadn't been like this? Even those famous emperors in history couldn't escape. Therefore, even the Empress was like this. No matter what, she was only a 23-year-old woman. Although her position as an Empress was different, she was far superior to ordinary people in many aspects, such as the mind and vision of an Empress, the governance of the country, and personal strength. However, all these couldn't hide the fact that she was only a 23-year-old woman. In some aspects, she might even be inferior to ordinary people. For example, she didn't have much resistance to pleasant words. This was especially true when she didn't hate him. Although it was a little despicable to think this way, he still had to work hard in this aspect. Of course, there were other actions that he had to take. For example, he had to choose some gifts for the Empress when he returned. At the same time, he had to prepare information on the exploration and excavation of iron ores, as well as the smelting of iron ores. The former was private, and the latter was public. He had to firmly grasp both aspects. After thinking for a while, Renbochin fell into a deep sleep. Too many things happened tonight. His mood was like a roller coaster, and he was really too tired. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on a soft mattress and was surrounded by a familiar scenery. I'm back. Renbochin lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. He was so lazy that he didn't want to move at all. In Dayo, he didn't dare to slack off. In a short period of time, he did things that he had never done in his entire life. He didn't even think that he would do them. After returning, he could finally slack off a little. He rolled a few times on the bed and lay down for a long time before sitting up. Renbochin stood in front of the window and looked out. It was snow-white outside, and the entire neighborhood was white. It should be 7 or 8 o'clock at this time, but he didn't see the sun. The sky was a little gloomy, and it looked like it was going to snow soon. Another 12 days had passed, and it was now the middle to late November. Chapter 10. Thank you to Lost Sheep 2007, and thank you to Eli for your tips. There were also Seal, and Zai for special operations, Lan Yao from Heaven, and Jia Gong from Quick Update. This sentence was very roundabout. There was another chapter at around 12 o'clock, and he would update it tomorrow. Chapter 127. Renbochin stood in front of the window for a while and seemed to have regained some of the feeling of being on Earth. He turned around and looked at the surveillance camera to see how he left this place 3 days ago. He sat on the chair and rewound the footage. When he appeared on the camera, it stopped and then played forward. At that time, he was sleeping on the bed. Then, he disappeared into thin air along with the things beside him and the bed sheets. There were no signs and there was nothing wrong. Renbochin rewound the footage again and played it again in slow motion. Indeed, there were no signs and he just disappeared into thin air. After watching it twice, Renbochin leaned back on the chair. In this case, it would be very difficult to find the reason for his transmigration. Could it be that he had to continue transmigrating like this? Renbochin suddenly thought that if he could really choose a world, would it be better to stay on Earth or in that world? The advantage of Earth was that life was stable, there were computers, mobile phones, and all kinds of convenient things. As long as the black mud cream was on the market, he could even buy a small island to live on. As for that world, it was full of unknowns. Kirin, Sword Mountain, Spirit Sword, the top 10 experts in the world, and perhaps other things that he did not know. If he was in that world, he would be able to experience many unknowns. However, the disadvantages were also very obvious. For example, he would always be in the hands of the Empress. In all fairness, Renbochin did not think that she was bad. However, the difference in strength and status was too big. He was like an ant in front of the other party. If the other party did not like him one day, she could crush him with one hand. This gave him no sense of security at all. His heart was always in suspense. He was not a person who loved adventure. If that was the case, it seemed that he would rather stay on Earth. Unfortunately, he did not have the opportunity to choose. He could only continue to be passive. He went to the kitchen and made a bowl of noodles. He had not eaten it for a long time and smelled the aroma. I wonder what would happen if I brought a few bags of instant noodles for the Empress. Renbochin suddenly had this idea. However, he decided to forget about it. It seemed that the Empress liked sweet food and wine more. He could bring some for her. After finishing the instant noodles and drinking the soup, Renbochin returned to his room and sat in front of the computer to look up iron ore prospecting, mining, steelmaking, and blast furnace technology. After an unknown period of time, Renbochin heard someone coming in. He opened the door and realized that it was the housekeeper. "Mr. Ren, you're back," the other party greeted him after seeing him. "Okay, you guys are busy." Renbochin nodded, closed the door, and looked at the time. It was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He spent the entire morning looking up information, so he didn't pay much attention to the time. Fortunately, Renbochin had found most of the information. Furthermore, Renbochin had also selected some of them. It should be able to be built in Dayo. He just had to find a place to print it out when he returned. After going out for lunch, he went to the supermarket and bought all kinds of candies and chocolates. This time, he didn't just buy White Rabbit creamy candies. He also bought some from Su Fuji. He also bought a box of liquor, Red Star Ergotu and Nulanshan Ergotu. Even though it was an ordinary bottle, it was much better than the strong alcohol that the Empress drank from the Yun nation. After moving these things back to the carriage, the Empress's preparations were more than half complete. However, Renbochin felt that he should still buy other things that could interest her. Then, he went to a special gift shop and bought a clockwork music box. There was a crystal ball on top, a crystal merry-go-round inside, and the music was city in the sky. At the very least, it looked sparkling and translucent. Young girls might like it. The price was also very cheap, less than 200 yuan. I wonder if she will be interested, Renbochin thought as he walked with the music box in his hand. Inexplicably, he felt like he was buying a gift for a girl that he had a crush on. Unfortunately, it wasn't. He had never done that kind of thing before. It seemed that he had liked a girl when he was in junior high, but he had never spoken about it. Up until now, he couldn't even remember what she looked like. Such an inexplicable thought surfaced in his mind, but he immediately suppressed it. It was just a moment of reverie. When he returned, the housekeeper had already left. After putting the things aside, Renbochin took his phone and sat on the sofa. In the past, he would immediately look at his phone after returning home. Now, he couldn't recall anything. There weren't many people looking for him. Even Qing himself had reduced his contact. The only people he really needed to contact were his parents and family. "Mom, did you call me?" Renbochin looked at his phone before calling her back. "The girl that I told you about previously is currently staying at your place. She just went there not long ago. If you have the chance, help her out. Even if you are not fated to be with her, you can still be friends with her. Don't think that just because you have some money now, you won't be able to find someone to help you in the future." Once the call was connected, he was immediately hit in the face. "I got it. Send me the phone number." Renbochin put the phone away from his ear and waited for the other side's voice to become softer before replying. "I have already sent the phone number and name to you. Hurry up and contact her," his mother reminded him again. "I got it." Renbochin really wanted to say, "Don't play matchmaker for no reason." Actually, your son likes men. However, if he did that, his parents would probably come here tonight. He threw his phone aside and didn't even take a look at the WeChat message from his mother. What did that someone's daughter or niece have to do with him? He had enough things to deal with now and really didn't have the mood to care about others. For the next 2 days, other than going out to print some documents, Renbochin had been cooped up in the house. During this period, he diligently tidied up the bedroom. It couldn't be helped. His slippers left footprints on the floor. He didn't know why it was so dirty with the windows closed. 2 days later, when Renbochin woke up again, he was already back in that unfamiliar room in the palace. The things that he wanted to bring were all beside him. There were a total of 2 boxes of 24 bottles of wine, a music box, a stack of printed documents, and a pile of milk candies. Renbochin pushed open the door and saw a new imperial guard at the door. "Can I see Her Majesty now?" Renbochin asked. "I'm afraid Her Majesty is in court now. Storyteller Ren will have to wait for a while." The imperial guard turned around and replied. From that night onwards, everyone that he met first swept a glance at him from head to toe. Renbochin was already used to this kind of gaze. Only when it was almost noon did the imperial guard come to inform him, "Storyteller Ren, Her Majesty wants to see you. Please help me move my things." "Thank you." Renbochin followed the principle that it would be a waste if he didn't use someone. The imperial guard carried the 2 boxes of wine while Renbochin brought the candy and crystal ball into the hall. The Empress was standing in front of the mirror and Qing Yuan was helping her to tie up her hair. Renbochin gestured to the imperial guard to place the things on the floor. He then walked forward and said, "No matter how Her Majesty dresses up, her looks will be unparalleled and make others feel ashamed of their inferiority. Thank God for Lanyao rewarding the sect leader." Chapter 1. Chapter 128. The Empress took a look at Renbochin in the mirror. After a while, she looked at herself in the mirror. After Qing Yuan tied up her hair, the Empress heard crisp and melodious music as soon as she turned around. That music really felt like crystal, sparkling and translucent. The melody was exquisite and warm, making people feel warm in their hearts. This was a style that they had never heard before, but it easily touched their hearts. However, it only lasted for a short period of 30 seconds before it stopped. "Your Majesty, this is the gift that I picked out for you," Renbochin said as he held the music box in his hands. "Did the music just now come from this?" the Empress asked curiously. Renbochin was holding a base with a crystal ball on it. There were 3 wooden horses inside that rotated along with the music. It was very exquisite. At the very least, the crystal ball and the crystal wooden horse and the crystal ball looked very exquisite. "Yes, Your Majesty. As long as you twist the spring at the side, you can play the music," Renbochin said. The Empress took the music box, twisted the spring at the side, and sure enough, the music sounded again. The 3 wooden horses also rotated along with the music. "You are very thoughtful," the Empress said as she fiddled with the music box. Renbochin continued, "These are the sweets that I brought back. I know that Your Majesty likes strong alcohol, so I specially found 24 bottles of fine wine for you. Bring them over." Renbochin passed the sweets to Qing Yuan and ran back to open the 2 boxes. He took out a bottle and unscrewed it to show her how to open it. After that, he screwed the cap and presented it to the Empress. Ordinary glass bottles were considered very crude in China, but the people in this world didn't think so. After all, the people of China were used to seeing things like glass, but it was still very rare for the people in this world. The Empress used 2 fingers to hold the mouth of the bottle. Her fingers were as slender as a feather, and her skin was as fair as cream. It was impossible to tell that she could dismantle a Gundam with one hand. The bottle was transparent, and one could see that the wine inside was clear without any impurities. Just this point alone was enough to satisfy the Empress. "Accompany me to have my meal. Hong Yuan, get someone to inform the Imperial Kitchen," the Empress said to Renbochin and casually threw the wine to Qing Yuan. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Renbochin quickly said. This was the first time. In the past, the Empress would eat, and he would watch. The Empress would sit, and he would stand. But now, his treatment had improved. In the past, the Empress would have her meals in this palace hall. A small table was placed in front of her. After all, given her status, the Empress's life wasn't considered luxurious at all. She usually only had 4 dishes and 1 soup. This time, they came to another hall. There was a table that was at least 3 to 4 meters long. The Empress sat at the head of the table while Renbochin stood at the side with his hands hanging by his side. "Take a seat." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Renbochin then sat down nearby. "Tell me, what's China like? I'm very curious. I wonder what the world beyond the heavens looks like." Renbochin pondered for a while and asked, "Which aspect would Your Majesty like to hear about? What do the Chinese powerhouses look like?" Renbochin pondered for a while and felt that it wasn't easy to bring up this topic. The strongest person in China was probably equivalent to an aboriginal commoner. At most, they were slightly stronger. "Your Majesty, every world has its own set of rules and scenery. In China, strength was not determined by strength, but by intelligence, wisdom, and knowledge. We manufactured all kinds of equipment. There are vehicles that can run without horsepower and are as fast as lightning. There are planes that can carry people in the sky. Furthermore, the internet allows people to instantly know what's happening thousands of miles away. Individual bravery has been replaced by equipment. Firearms can take a person's life from thousands of steps away, and they can fire more than 10 times in an instant. Cannons can attack from a distance where the human eye can't see, and nuclear weapons can destroy a city from thousands of miles away. Destroy a city from thousands of miles away. There's actually such a thing in this world. The Empress was slightly surprised. Renbochin looked up at the Empress's surprised expression and smiled. Even though the people on Earth are weak in martial arts, they can still shock you with their various technologies. Indeed, the area within a 5-kilometer radius is like purgatory. There are no humans or animals left. Such weapons are too powerful and are prohibited from being used. Such a lethal weapon should be prohibited, the Empress muttered. Yes, as I said before, the Chinese use intelligence, wisdom, and knowledge to determine a person's status. According to the different interests and abilities of an individual, a variety of social divisions have been developed. By combining the wisdom of many people, the goal is to make life more convenient, explore the mysteries of the world, and understand the nature of the world. Our society is more stable, and the lives of the people are more prosperous. Even though there are rich and poor people, the majority of the ordinary people can be said to be well off. For example, basic necessities like food, clothing, housing, and transportation aren't things that most people need to consider. What most people consider is how to obtain a better life. The human heart is always insatiable, the Empress said faintly. The human heart is always insatiable. They want to obtain more and no more. Only then will the whole world improve. Otherwise, it will become a pool of stagnant water. Renbochin briefly told the Empress about China, but he tried his best to talk about it in a positive way. After all, he also had the thought of not washing one's dirty linen in public. Just like on Earth, if your country was rich and powerful, you would receive more respect abroad. Even though it depended on the individual, the strength of a country was also a plus for a person in a foreign country. Being backed by a strong country and being backed by a weak country were two completely different things. Even though he didn't have much influence here, he was still willing to talk about China in a good way. While they were talking, the dishes were served. Renbochin didn't say anything else. Instead, he got up and poured a glass of wine for the Empress. The Empress took a sniff and drank it in one gulp. Then, she nodded and said, "Not bad." From the expression on her face, one could tell that she liked it very much. "If there's enough food, this kind of wine can be brewed," Renbochin said. "I will leave this matter to you. In a while, follow me to Qingxin Palace Hall to choose a martial arts manual. After you have a foundation, I will send someone to see if you can increase the production of the iron mine and how to improve the smelting of iron. After that, you can brew the wine. I don't need a lot, just enough for the palace to drink," the Empress said after thinking for a while. Renbochin nodded. This matter wasn't difficult. In fact, Dayo wasn't lacking in food, but most of it was meat, vegetables, and rice. Therefore, the Empress didn't dare to brew too much. "Actually, we can brew wine and exchange it with the Yun nation, the Qin nation, and Great Xia for food, salt, and even ironware. This kind of high-alcohol wine will definitely have a considerable market in those two nations. I just don't know the standard of the wine in the palace banquet in those two nations." Renbochin asked. During the banquet that day, the wine in the palace was much better than the wine that caretaker Shi brought out. However, it was still inferior to the high-alcohol wine on Earth in terms of taste, color, and other aspects. Renbochin wanted to know the standard of the wine in the other nations. "It's considered high-grade." "That's right. If we can brew wine that's better than theirs, we can sell it to other nations at a high price. Then, we can buy the necessities we need. Things that others don't have, but need, will be of high value. There has always been a huge market for things like wine." Renbochin laughed. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.